Most people have never heard someone die. The moaning, the crying, the pleading. That last breath before they go quiet. Most people will never hear those things. I do daily. No, I'm not a serial killer on a hell-bent mission to cleanse the earth. I'm a 911 operator. When I took the job 10 years ago, I assumed I would more or less be like an air traffic controller, but for emergency response teams. For a large portion of my job, that's true. That's the easy part. Death is harder. Listening to someone expire leaves a gully in your soul, a space that can't be refilled. First time I heard someone's grandma give out before the ambulance got there, I had to leave work early. The first time a child was on the other end of the line, I sobbed in the bathroom for 30 minutes. Mama's not moving. I need someone big to help. That precious boy's voice plays in my head on a loop. The secret is to have a mindless hobby to use post-shift to help you wind down. Some operators knit. One lady quotes scenes from her favorite fantasy books. A bunch of people read horror movie novelizations. I puzzle. Every time I get home, regardless of how tired I am, I sit at my puzzling desk and I connect a few pieces. Reveal the picture bit by bit. It's healing. As time goes by, you get better at compartmentalizing calls. That's work and it stays at work. Bad things happen all the time. Your job is to fix them. And people die every day. Sometimes your words are the last comfort that they'll get before they meet St. Peter. It's a gift and a curse. People believe it's a straightforward job, but most are ignorant of what lies outside their bubble. I don't correct their assumptions because it isn't worth ruining their day. What kind of ghoul would I be if I started yapping about hearing an older man weep because his wife had stopped breathing, and how devastated his children are going to be? I would never get invited back to the Bunko Club, that's for damn sure. But last night, I had a call rattle me like I haven't been rattled in years. A series of calls, actually. Every hour for the entire time that I was at work. Same number, same location, same person. I had just settled in for my shift. Fran, the woman that I share a cube with, had left her usual mess of loose corn chips on the console. Muttering words that would get HR involved, I dutifully swept up the trash. And the lady was kind and sweet, but she left a lot to be desired in the cleanliness department. I had a sneaking suspicion that she was a hoarder, but I wasn't ever going to go to her place to confirm it. "You ready?" Mary asked. She sat across from me and was perpetually happy. I don't know how she does it, but she does. She's the group's jokester, and trust me, in this line of work you need it. Mary's tongue was pickled in gallows humor. It didn't quite square with her church board member appearance. We contain multitudes, I suppose. "How's it been so far?" Mary shook her head. "I'm not gonna say the Q word and jinx us," she said, meaning quiet. Once you say that it's quiet, things change in a heartbeat. It's something that we don't say. It's like saying Macbeth in a theater. Please don't. I'm still recovering from yesterday," I said. "A full moon always brings out the nutsos." "Oh, it's supposed to be full again tonight," she said, shooting me finger guns. "Get ready for some corpses." And despite myself, I chuckled. "Geez Louise, Mary." She shrugged. "Oh, it's coming, it always does. Violent weirdos are attracted to the moonlight. It's why we call them lunatics. Lunatic. No, it isn't, I said. Seriously. Oh, the Latin footprint is large, dear. And if there's anything I know, it's Latin men with big footprints, she said, sticking out her tongue and putting her headsets on. I swear you are the living end, I said, chuckling. What would Bob say if he heard you? Oh, Bob knows my predilections. He screws up and I'm on the first flight to Guadalajara. I sat down in my cubicle. And miss all this. Effeh, she said with a wave of her hand. I'll take the beach and the heat any day of the week. Her line rang and she sighed. Back to the grindstone. I placed the headphones over my prematurely graying hair and I waited for my first call. It wasn't long. 911, what's the nature of your emergency? Static filled the receiver. In the age of cell phones, this is a common occurrence. Patience is key. It's most of this job, really. That and calm. You can't panic and start mirroring the caller's emotional state. It's difficult, but it's required. If you can't do it, you get the boot. 911, hello. The coughing came through the phone line. I think my house is on fire. Male, middle-aged, voice was hoarse, perhaps from smoke inhalation. My mind taking off information to add to the call file. My fingers flew across the keyboard, filling out forms, informing the correct authorities, and creating a needed record. Okay, what's your address? 1812 Blanchard, a white house near the creek. Okay, perfect. What happened? Can you see the flames or... I can't, I'm in my bedroom. I don't know what happened. It's coming from the other room. A lot of smoke and the door to my room feels warm. I hate fires. They happen at random and they can grow uncontrollably fast. Once I had a couple in a Range Rover get slammed by a semi, trapping them in the car. Their engine erupted in flames and I had to stay on the line and helplessly listen as they burned to death. Okay, I have fire and ambulance on the way. Is there anybody else in the house? It's Jesus. The fire is. His voice morphing into a coughing fit. It's so hot. Help is coming. Is there any way for you to get out of the house? A window? It's nailed shut. Odd and possibly criminal. I added a note. Can you break the window? No, it's hurricane related, but let me try. Hold on. He said, stepping away from the phone. He stomped over to the window and banged on it. No shattering. He came back. It's not working. More smoke is coming through. Get lower to the floor and stay calm. Help is on the way. Do you have anything heavy that could break the glass? A bat, anything? The phone call dropped. Shit, I said to myself. I grabbed the number on the screen and planned to call them back. Before I did, though, I reached out to the authorities. Dispatch, I need a fire truck and ambulance to 1812 Blanchard Street. Adult male trapped in a bedroom. Nobody else should be there. Mary's head rose like the sun over my cubicle wall. She had something on her mind, but had the sense to wait until I was over. I recalled the number on the screen, but got a message informing me that the line was no longer in service. Shit, had the fire spread that quickly? Dispatch, be advised, there's no way for me to connect with the home. The line is dead. A pause as the message was relayed. Operator, what was that address again? 1812 Blanchard, a white house near the creek. Operator, we've got a bus on Blanchard, but they say the street numbers end at 1810. And there isn't a fire anywhere down there. No smoke, nothing. Let me double check, I said, glancing at my notes. I was right, 1812 Blanchard Street. Dispatch, that's the address that he told me. I'll try calling again. Another attempt, but the same result. The increasingly annoyed tone echoed in my ears as an electronic voice told me the number that I was trying to reach had been disconnected. I relayed the message back to the fire department. Operator, there isn't a house with that number. I glanced at Mary, who nodded. She came around and pulled up the recorded call. Every call gets saved for situations just like this. She gave it a listen, and when she got to the relevant part, she scribbled down the address. She turned the pad toward me. 1812 Blanchard. We've confirmed the address given to us. Are you sure the street numbers end at 1810? Affirmative, operator. We'll circle around, but this might be a sick prank. Copy, I said, hanging up. Mary nodded at the phone. Full moon. If that was acting, he was sincere. It didn't feel like a prank. Oh, you'd be surprised. Actors get their start somewhere. Some on the stage and some playing pranks. You did your part. I know, but still, I said, leaning back in my chair. This feels off. Need a break? I wanted to say yes and run to the break room, but I couldn't compel myself to do so. If I went on a break, I left my team down a person. With a full moon, that wasn't the best decision. I needed to stay and pitch in. I'm good, just always gut twisting when they go sideways like that. She shrugged. This one isn't on us, Mary said, taking the royal we on my behalf. They gave us the wrong information. We sent guys out to help. Yeah. We'll just have to send them a few days later when the smell hits the neighbors. Mary, I said, that's wild even for you. Sorry, but like I said, the full moon brings out our crazy. I'm gonna grab a sneaky snack from the machine. You want one? It's on me. No, I'm good, thanks. Don't dwell, Mary said before leaving. I slumped back into my chair. I didn't have time to dwell on the call because my phone started ringing. That's a silver lining to this job. Even on the worst days, you have to keep moving. This is a marathon, not a sprint. You can dwell in your therapist's office. An hour later, while putting out a few actual fires, my phone rang again. 911, what's the nature of your emergency? Hello? I want to report a fire, he said in a strange whisper. I immediately recognized the voice. It was the man from 1812 Blanchard Street. He held the phone close to his mouth, his quickening breath becoming a backing track to our conversation. Sir, did you call earlier? I don't know, he said earnestly. I just woke up in my house and I can smell burning. The smoke here is so thick. He started coughing. It's everywhere. Mary rose over my desk again. She mouthed, Is this the guy? I nodded and she walked over to my side of the cubicle. An audience was not what I wanted, but this call was so odd that another pair of ears might not be a bad thing. Are you still in your house? I think so. What's the address? 1812 Blanchard. We sent units there, but they didn't find any house. Are you sure you have the correct address? Yes, he said, slightly coughing. I know my address. Mary leaned in and whispered, Ask him to clarify for our record. You are saying 1812 Blanchard, correct? Yes. Oh, I think I found my bedroom door. It's not hot anymore. Can you exit? There was a loud bang on the other end of the phone and a nervous yelp. I leaned in, pressing the speakers against my ears, attempting to pick up any background noise that might help suss out where he was. When he came back on the line, his voice was distant and nervous. "The door fell off its hinges. I'm walking down my hallway, but it's pitch black in here. The walls are covered in heavy soot." Mary took the pad of paper and wrote, "Have unit on street. Can you see or hear them?" "Sir," I said, "we have a unit near your location, but they can't find you. Do you hear them calling or see anyone?" "My hallway isn't this long," he said. "Sir, can you call out for her?" There was a scream, and then the line went dead. My jaw dropped, but my fingers were quickly redialing the number. Mary ran over to her desk and relayed the information to the new ambulance on the scene. When I called back, the line was dead again. I threw my headphones off in a rage. "Units say they didn't hear any screaming." "Something's going on," I said. "This isn't a prank." "Oh, it's a weird one for sure," Mary said. "Did you hear anything that could help?" "No, I haven't even gotten his name yet." Steven, our boss, came walking over. His head popped into view after I threw off my headphones, and it was just a matter of time before he would eventually mosey on over. It was his job to make sure that we stayed even-keeled on the phones. Any flash of humanity and you might find yourself done with the shift, and if it continues, you might be done with the job. "What's going on here?" I sighed. "I'm sorry about the headphones." He raised his hand and gave me a warm smile. When he spoke, he kept his tone newscaster smooth and honey sweet. "As I'm fond of reminding management, we're not robots. Sometimes we get worked up." "I didn't mean it, frustrated is all," I said. "The guys called twice, talking about a fire but gave us the wrong address," Mary said. "No one can find him. He called an hour apart. The house fire would have chewed up his home by then, right?" Steven nodded. "Yeah, you'd think. Is it a prank or someone lonely looking to connect?" "I don't know," I said. "He sounds genuine but confused." "Was he injured?" "Beyond coughing, he hasn't said. Maybe head trauma, but I can't tell over the phone." Steven said, his fingers tented. "This is a tricky one. Let's make sure we note everything in the file. A CYA move. Can I give the calls a listen?" "Sure," I said, moving out of the way. Steven pulled out his own pristine headphones, plugged them in, and pulled up both calls. He closed his eyes, his full attention on the push and pull of the conversation. He listened once, paused, listened a second time, and removed his headphones. "You did a fantastic job," he said with a nod. "Very professional." "Thanks." He shifted in the seat. "I know it was a hectic call, but did you catch a woman screaming in the background?" "What?" I said, confused. "What woman?" "It's faint, but you can hear it in both calls. Here, let me cue it up for you on the first call." He did just that. I handed him my headphone jack and he plugged me in. He clicked play and I pancaked the speakers against my ears. There was a scream. "Jesus Christ," I said. How did you catch that?" Steven smiled. "I'm like the sonar guy from the Hunt for Red October. I don't know what any of that means." He softly chuckled. "Oh, I sometimes forget how dated my references are." "I got it, Steven. We olds gotta stick together," Mary said. "Peak Alec Baldwin's submarine movie. Worth your trouble for his hair alone." "If he calls again, flag me down. Let's see if we can't figure this whole thing out." I agreed, and he headed back to do his rounds. As soon as he was out of earshot, I exhaled. Oh, I thought he was gonna run me through the ringer. Steven is straight-laced but good people. He gets the ups and downs of the job. Yeah, but showing emotion is. It's normal, your calls were fine, you're human. It's gonna be natural to show some scars. It lets everyone know that you care. If they wanted robots, they would hire AI agents. Oh, perish the thought, I said with a smile. Besides, the AI agents would suck. Mary laughed. Oh, they'd probably encourage people to walk into the flames. I stifled a laugh. Mary smirked and tapped the top of my desk and went back to work. An hour later, he called back. Hello? He said, his voice quiet and distant. I want to report a fire. Are you still at 1812 Blanchard Street? I don't know, he said. I stood and waved my hand to get Steven's attention. He dropped what he was doing and jogged over to my cubicle. But I've been walking down this hallway for a while now. Is there any fire? Oh, it reeks of smoke, but I can't see any fire, he said. It is hazy, though. Steven came over and wrote a message on the pad. What's his name? Sir, what's your name? Is there anyone that we can reach that might be able to help? Mike, and no, there isn't anyone who can help me. Mike what? I pressed. Huh? I swear that I heard footsteps. Steven scribbled another question on the pad. Do you hear the woman? I shook my head no, but I dug in with Mike. Mike, who are the women in the background? Huh? I heard women screaming in the background. Do they need medical assistance? No, he blurted. There aren't any women. I glanced at Steven and he didn't believe it either. Mary's face rose over the top of my cubicle wall. She shook her head no, making us a trio of non-believers. Is there someone that we can reach out to help find you? It's getting hot. I think that I'm nearing the fire. The smoke is thicker, he said, his train of thought derailed by a coughing fit. I think I'm in my living room, but none of my things are here. Was I robbed? The phone line went dead. Damn it, I uttered. Try calling back, Steven said. I did. The phone line was dead again. Steven mused, his tone higher than before. To an outsider, this wasn't a big deal, just a man curious about a mystery. But to us who work with him every day, that high-pitched musing meant that he was worried something bad was happening. To my ears, he was panicking. This is odd. What do you think's happening? Let me listen to the call closely, he said. I moved out of the way and he took a seat at my desk. He pressed the headphones against his head and closed his eyes. The call replayed. He did it again and again. After a fourth time, he took off the headphones and stared at us. I heard wailing, he said. Near the start of the call, there's a roar or a buzz, like a stadium full of people watching their team lose. Mary and I both gave it a listen. Well, I'll be damned, I said. Is there a game at Washington Park tonight? Mary asked. I don't believe so, Steven said. I could be wrong, but I follow the team closely. I think they're across the country. Who's wailing? Oh, maybe it's the wind blowing through the trees. It can whistle if it's strong enough. Through the lines that could be confused as wailing, Mary offered. Let me call someone, Steven said, pulling out his cell phone. Hey Jerry, it's Steven. Quick question, you on patrol tonight? Was wondering if you could do me a favor and follow up on a series of calls that we've been getting. He explained everything up to that point and got assurances that the cop would check out the area near the stadium, and if he isn't called away, Blanchard Street. After he hung up, Stephen turned to us. He's a good egg. If there's something odd going on, he'll find it. In the meantime, just keep doing what you're doing. We'll figure this out. Truth is, it's probably some stupid prank, he sighed. A prank in the emergency call center. Is there no civility anymore? Not an ounce of it anywhere, Mary said. Just check the news. Stephen gave a weak smile. I don't need to read about it. I feel it in my bones. Good job tonight. Keep me in the loop. He got up and left. As soon as he was out of earshot, Mary leaned into me. He's worried about something. I've never seen him so stressed, I said. What do you think this is? What do I think this is, or what do I think he thinks this is? I shrugged. Both? Okay, well, I think he's hoping that it's a prank, but I don't think he believes that. I think he's worried this is some sort of killer taunting us. Like how the Zodiac sent letters to the newspaper and police. Oh shit, I said. You think? Oh, I think he thinks that. I think that someone has serious head trauma and or is on designer drugs and is stumbling around the woods. He's probably in danger. Yeah, I agree, I said. But what's tripping me up is he sounds like he's aware on some level. Like he's confused but clear about his confusion, if that makes sense. Mary screwed her face up. Not really, babe. Like I think he's aware but he's stuck somewhere and that's throwing him off. Maybe he was kidnapped and is being held by someone or something. Mary nodded. That makes sense, he might be. I wish he had given us a last name. Might be easier to find his next of kin. In between calls, I can do some searching. I might scare up a family member or two. A nice choice of phrase, Mary said with a wink. Scare up a family member just to give them a scare. I rolled my eyes. It's been a night, Mary. Oh, just messing with you. It's a good idea. I used to work flirt with a guy in housing. He might be able to help. Work flirt? Oh, you know, both of you like the thrill, but both understand nothing will happen. It gets the blood flowing and sends a little charge through your nervous system. Harmless, but it lets you know that you still got it. Uh-huh. She put her hand on her hip. And when you're married as long as I've been and are as old as my birth certificate proclaims me to be. I held up my hands and laughed. Mary, it's cool. I'm just giving you shit, I get it. Everyone wants to feel wanted. I'm just glad you work flirted with a guy that can help us and not, I don't know, someone in parks or sanitation. So yeah, call your work fling. Oh, not a fling, a flirt. A fling is physical, flirt is words, maybe a glance. Words matter. A work flirty then. Does that work better? She nodded and headed off to do her thing. I sat back down and shook my head. The full moon really does bring out the strange. I got back to the grind, unsure if I would get another call from Mysterious Mike. Despite my other calls, my mind kept a candle of thought burning on this Mike situation. Nothing made sense. I was worried that he was in trouble. The image of a man with head trauma stuck in a fire, or just lost and confused, calling for help but never finding it. It chilled me. His dead body found in a shallow depression, curled in the fetal position, unfound until years later, when there was nothing left but bones and an old cell phone. Hey, you're never gonna believe what my housing guy said, Mary said about a half hour later. You called him this late? No, I texted. He's a night owl. Plays some stupid game online with friends in China or something. I don't know, it's not important. He said that he ran the house number through the department records and he found something interesting. My phone rang and I picked it up. 911, what's the nature of your emergency? It was Mike. Something's stalking me, he said, his voice a whisper again. I can't see it, but it's moving in the shadows. Where are you, Mike? How do you know my name? You've called me several times. I have, I don't. He stopped. From somewhere in the background, a slow, deliberate growl broke through the line. Mike, is there a safe location that you can get to? No answer. Mike, can you hear me? I waved at Steven, who was over in a split second. Growling again, closer, more defined. I pressed the headphones against my ears. Wailing in the background. Screams. Not my team fell behind screams either. Tortured ones. Men and women in something not natural. Mike? It moved away from me, he said. I don't hear it anymore. Mike, what is your last name? The smoke is thinning. Oh Jesus, can you hear the screaming? I didn't think anybody would hear the screaming. Mike, what is going on? There's a light in front of me, in the distance. Somebody's calling me. Can you hear that? Are those your guys? I turned to Steven, who shook his head no. Mike, that's not us. If you can find a place to hide. There's another person, Ed. Hello? Mike, that's not us. Where are you? The phone line went dead. I shook my head. Someone's going to hurt him. He's in danger. He's not at 1812 Blanchard, Mary said. Steven and I turned to her, waiting for an explanation. Because it burned down in 1987. Shock joined the group chat. Both Steven and I found our jaws falling slack, eyebrows raised on our foreheads. I broke the silence first. Oh, what the hell? A work flirt confirmed it. Said it was the first house on what would become Blanchard Street. It was more rural at the time, off a dirt road near a creek. Now it's a subdivision. I know someone who lives out there, I said. Fire guys thought that it was arson but couldn't prove it, Mary said. She leaned forward, her excitement nearly spilling out of her. As if that wasn't weird enough, the owner of the house was a guy named Michael. Oh, Michael what? I asked. Well, that's another weird thing. The file was damaged. The last name was unrecognizable. Said that he might be able to check paper files when he's back at the office, Mary said. She leaned into me and whispered. Also mentioned that he wanted to check something else out when he's back in the office. She winked. Did he die in the fire? Steven asked. Mary shrugged. Well, if he did, they never found his body. Place was left to rot. Michael never claimed insurance or anything. What the hell? I said before realizing that I was still at work and softening. What the heck? Steven placed his hand on my shoulder. No, your first phrase was the correct one. He turned to Mary. Work flirt? Long story. Did this work flirt mention anything about? The phone rang again. All our eyes met, but I answered it. 911, what is the nature of your emergency? The line crackled and there was nothing but the jittery wavering of electronic currents clashing against each other. I waited for the ghost of his voice to break through, but all I got was that wailing. It was clearer now, but some voices weren't in English. There were dozens of languages, some completely foreign to me. What's going on? Steven asked. I ignored him. Mike, are you there? The wires went from cross to clear, and Mike's voice broke through the line. He was speaking with the stranger that he had hailed the last time that his phone dropped. If he heard me speaking, he didn't let on. I became privy to a private conversation. I've been walking in this smoky room forever, he said. Indeed, you've been lost for quite some time, the strange voice said. It was deep and measured. But your time in the smoke has come to an end. Well, if that's true, what's that smell? It's... Mike raged. A stench that you had smelled before, no. I don't know what you mean, Mike said. Yes, you do, the stranger said. They're all there, you know, waiting for you. Mike, I said, can you hear me? Over the telephone lines, the ripple of the igniting fire rushed forth, so clear and so close that I braced for an incoming fire wave. The inside of my closed eyes shot off glowing blobs of orange and yellow. After the flame came the crackle and sizzle of human flesh, the screams of pain, the begging of mercy, the pleas to a disinterested God, the sobs who had never created enough tears to extinguish the growing blaze. You okay? Mary asked, but I didn't respond. Tears flowed from my closed eyes. The phone line connected me to this horror. The vivid imagery of what I was hearing flashed against my eyelids. Dozens of young girls in the final throes of death, the fear in their panicked, searching eyes, frantic windmailing hands failing to put out the encroaching flames. Their skin darkening until it was a black crisp, cut loose from any semblance of humanity and taking to the breeze. A body returned to its elemental state, erased from existence but still screaming. Their wailing reaching up from beyond the grave to an invisible spot in the northern sky. Their wailing, wailing, wailing. Hear us please. The chaos ceased. It went quiet. What's happening? Stephen asked. What's going on? Crying. Soft, small sniffles. Mike was sobbing. He put his head in his hands and he let the tears flow. His shoulders hunched and rose with each jag. I couldn't help it, Mike weakly offered. I needed to do it to them. I'm as God made me. They're waiting for you, the stranger said. Please, God, let this end, Mike screamed. The stranger laughed, deep, loud, and methodically slow. Menace took roost where joy should be. God is not welcome where we're going. Where are we going? Mike asked, afraid he had already figured out the riddle but praying that he was wrong. I pressed my headphones tightly against my ears. The speakers became part of me. I didn't know what I was listening to, but I damn knew that it wasn't a phone call. It was a reckoning. The footsteps ceased and the cries stilled. The crackling fire dulled. Your time has come, Michael. Your long walk has ended. Through this door, the stranger said, rapping his knuckles against the wood. It echoed in the void. Through this door, you will finally find the answers to the unanswerable. Be given the knowledge withheld from your kind until we've determined your worth. But this comes with a grave cost. A debt you will pay until we say. Michael, I said, my voice soft. Michael, can you hear me? The line dropped. I curled my fingers around my headset and I pulled it off my head. My hair got caught in my fumbling grasp. Wisps fell, creating a veil from the strays. I dropped the headset on the desk and turned to Stephen. Tears welled and rolled down my ashen cheeks. Go home, Stephen said. He placed his reassuring hand on my shoulder and gave it a faint squeeze. I needed that. A reminder of the good in humanity. Thank you, I said, my head spacey and disconnected. Mary came around the cubicle and swept me up in a bear hug. She pressed my face into her soft shoulders and whispered a prayer over me. I wrapped my arms around her waist and her warmth seeping into my bones. I closed my eyes and sobbed. She held me, muttering prayers until some of my negative energy flowed into her, easing my load. "I've got room to spare," she said. "We're together in this. We're in a rough business. We've got to be there for each other." I thanked her and left, but I didn't go home. I had somewhere else to be. Voices calling me for help. Puzzle pieces that needed to be affixed. A full picture waiting to be seen. My tires turned down a well-worn gravel road, Blanchard Street. I followed it until the number stopped. 1810, end of the line. I parked my car and walked into the forest at the end of the street. That first call rang in my brain. A white house near the creek. I glanced down at the ground, wavering grass, growing over long-faded tire ruts. You would miss them if you weren't looking for them, but I was. The house was built off what would become Blanchard Street by a long, twisting driveway. I followed it. On the side of the overgrown path, the moonlight glinted off something hidden in the tall grass. I halted my funeral march and squatted to get a better view. I kicked a tangle of braided black wires, power and telephone lines, fallen and rotten. It snaked through the grass. A closed-off ramp of the information superhighway. The babbling of the creek found my ears before my eyes caught the moonlight shimmering off the surface. The cool night wind blew my hair into my face. I brushed it away and turned on my flashlight. I walked along the creek for a while until I came across a small berm at the water's edge. I kicked away some of the dirt. It was the buried remains of an old house. And nature had reclaimed this spot, but only just recently. Still, the shallow history of this location cut me deep. I closed my eyes, recalling the vision of the house, their screams echoing in my mind. My body, compelled by something primal, brought me to the back of the house. I dropped to my knees, pressing my fingers into the dirt, and I started digging. It didn't take long to discover what I came here for. The black soil turned gray as ash became part of the mixture. 3 more handfuls and I found something hard that made me recoil in disgust. The moonlight glinted off the polished, burned remains of a femur. If I kept digging, I would find all their bodies. He kidnapped, beat, and burned them alive. He shoved the remains under his house and never believed that he would get caught. And for nearly 30 years he was right. The world had stopped caring about these girls. He figured time had won. He was wrong. I rocked back on my legs, put my head in my hands and cried. I had never met these women, never seen the joyful moments they had. Stolen kisses, laughing with friends, silent contemplation as they grew up in a world that waited to knock them around. A bright comet streaking across the sky, lighting up the loved ones who held their gaze, only to burn out before their time. A shimmer of fading memories left in their wake. I had only seen them as the light dimmed. I knew them in a way that only Mike had seen. I cursed that we shared anything in common. I balled my hands into fists and I punched the ground. My knuckles barely dented the soil, but smoothing it all the same. They didn't deserve this. A ripple of energy rushed across the back of my neck, stopping my dirt pummeling. I turned and was greeted with the sight of dozens of white balls of light floating effortlessly over a specific spot. As soon as I acknowledged them, they dissipated like a dream in the morning light. I walked to where they had been gathering. The ends of the ancient telephone lines sank into the ground. Mike's body was under there. If I poked around, I would find the husk of his torched remains. The irony of this monster meeting his end in a fire wasn't lost on me. But I didn't care to find Mike's remains. He had gotten his ending. It was time for these lost souls to get their proper ending. It was time for their families to stop wondering. It was time to go home. I dialed 911. "Hello, I need you to send the police. I've just found human remains." Today's episode is sponsored by Brooklyn Bedding. You know, I talk a lot about fear on this channel, but nothing messes with you more than bad sleep. Seriously, if you're not sleeping right, everything feels off. Your mood, your focus, even little things start getting under your skin. And that's exactly why I switched to a mattress from Brooklyn Bedding. I've been using the Aurora Luxe, and the difference is immediate. I fall asleep faster, I stay asleep, and I wake up actually feeling rested, which honestly wasn't happening before. What I really like is how they do things. Every mattress is built right here in the USA in their own factory. There's no middlemen and no gimmicks, just high quality materials and real attention to detail. You can feel that the second that you lay down. And if you're like me and tend to sleep hot, they've got cooling tech built in, so you're not waking up in the middle of the night overheating. And they even offer a 120-night comfort trial, so there's really no risk in trying it out. So if your sleep has been off lately, do yourself a favor. Go to brooklynbedding.com and use my promo code MrCreeps at checkout to get 30% off site-wide. This offer is not available anywhere else. That's brooklynbedding.com and promo code MrCreeps for 30% off site-wide. Support our show and let them know that we sent you after checkout. brooklynbedding.com, promo code MrCreeps. Ever since I was released from prison, I've only worked the night shift. Whether it was because this kind of lonely drudge work was the only employment that I could get, or whether it was because I secretly like it, I couldn't say. By now, I've stopped wondering. The world after dark suits me. With the streets empty and most businesses closed, there's no one to turn me down for a rental contract or a loan. No need to explain to anybody why I can't attend university or vote. The day people have their world, and me, I've got mine. I didn't expect to hear back from the warehouse gig, but I had to try something. I was sick of the meat packing plant where I had been working, sick of my boss's high-pitched whiny voice, and the smell of freezer-burned blood in the air. AI filters usually rejected my applications the minute that my conviction was flagged. But a few nights later, I received a call. The man on the other end of the line introduced himself as Dale Clemens. He told me his company had received my application and that, as far as he was concerned, I was as good as hired. I could meet him after the last shift to begin my trial period and to fill out the paperwork. I sighed and launched into the part of the interview process that I hated the most. The part where I reminded my future boss about my criminal record to make sure that it wouldn't be a problem. Instead of answering, Clemens asked if I had really committed the crime that I had been found guilty of. When I told him that I was innocent, he just laughed. That's what we all say. At 10 p.m. the following Friday, I met Dale at the warehouse's rear entrance to learn about my new position. He was a beefy 50-something guy who wore too much cologne and smiled like a used car salesman while he talked. He showed me around the custodian's closet and pointed to a pair of headlamps on the wall. Each of the areas that I was expected to clean was on its own circuit breaker, but I would need to use the headlamps to move around the warehouse floor. The main lights were kept off overnight, Dale explained, in order to save power. A security guard patrolled the grounds, but my shift began before his and it ended later. And given how big the place was, it was unlikely that the two of us would ever even see each other. 2 break rooms, 4 bathrooms, 8 offices, and 1 basement. If I could clean all of it in 6 hours, I could take home my minimum wage paycheck and do it all again the next night, 6 days per week. Before he wandered off into the gloom of the parking lot, Dale wished me good luck and said that he hoped I remembered to bring some spare batteries for the headlamps. I couldn't tell if he was joking. And the offices were all white walls, gray tile, and particle board furniture. Apart from emptying trash cans and a little light dusting, there wasn't much to do there. The first bathroom was another story. Its floor was sticky with dusty gray boot prints and what I had hoped was spilled soda. There were dead flies and hardened snot encrusted onto most of the sinks, and what I found in the last toilet stall made me grateful for the industrial-strength chemicals that I had been given to work with. With my nose full of the reek of bleach, I moved on to the main warehouse floor. The darkness and the sheer scale of the place made me feel like I had stepped into the belly of some enormous, deep-sea creature. Apart from my 2 headlamps, the only source of light was the glow of the emergency exit signs in each wall of the building. Between them, the tall metal shelves seemed to stretch on forever. And the air was stale and it tasted like cardboard. It took me nearly 20 minutes to cross the warehouse floor. During all that time, I didn't hear a single noise apart from my own footsteps and the squeak of the cart's wheels. The quiet was unsettling, but it wasn't dangerous, at least not in the way that prison had been. I mopped another bathroom, wiped down the tabletops, and microwave off the first break room, and then I headed back across the blackness to the next assignment. I finished in just under 4 hours, or so I thought, until I remembered the basement. I realized that I had no idea where it was located. Clemens hadn't told me, and my other work areas were so obviously placed that I hadn't thought to ask. And there was a faded blueprint pinned to the wall of the janitor's closet, right beside an out-of-date calendar and some nudie magazine photos from the 80s. I ran my finger across the building's plan. No staircases, no second floor plan, no other level, no basement. 2 break rooms, 4 bathrooms, 8 offices, and 1 basement. If I closed my eyes, I could hear Clemens' thick voice inside my skull. There was no doubt that he had mentioned it. I felt panic tightening my chest. So far, I had overcome my criminal record by being a model employee. But if I was fired after my first day on the job, all of that work would be for nothing. It would be back to the bottom of the barrel, if I could find any work at all. I thought of other ex-cons that I knew, guys with bodies beneath their belts who had been important behind bars, but who now lived beneath underpasses and shook cups at strangers for spare change because they didn't want to risk jail time again. All it would take, I reminded myself, was a little bad luck. And maybe this was it. I wished that I could ask the security guard, but I hadn't seen the guy since I had arrived, and there was no time to wander around looking for him. My only choice was to return to the warehouse floor and hope that I could find the basement entrance on my own. It felt like stepping out into empty space. Before long, the beam of my headlamp could no longer reach the warehouse walls, leaving me alone among all those endless metal shelves. Although I was moving in a straight line, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had taken a wrong turn somewhere. But even if I had, All I had to do was walk backwards and eventually I would find the door that I had come from, right? I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. A staircase, a large metal trap door, maybe even an elevator. I heard nails scratching across the concrete behind the shelves to my left. I figured it was probably rats. Just about everywhere I had worked the night shift had them, but no tiny glowing eyes stared back at me when I had turned to check. The further I walked, the more I thought about that sound. It reminded me of dog claws in need of a trim, but Dale hadn't mentioned anything about a guard dog. And 10 minutes later, however, I still hadn't seen anything that looked even remotely like a basement entrance, or an animal. Something else was starting to worry me as well. As huge as the warehouse was, my headlamp should have revealed the opposite wall by now. Not even the glow of its emergency exit sign was visible. I walked a little faster, and that was when I noticed another light to my left. It seemed to be coming from the center of the warehouse and from the floor. I hurried toward it with a smirk. I wouldn't be done early, but at least I'd have the job finished on time. The closer I got, however, the more my smile faded. The warehouse floor was concrete, but the stairwell in its center looked like something out of a suburban home. Beige drywall, a tan carpet, a white paneled door at the bottom. That was where the light was coming from. I gulped, unhooked a bucket of cleaning supplies from my cart, and then headed down the stairs. I reached out for the brass door handle and hesitated. I did not want to know what was on the other side of that door. The hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood up. The tension in the air felt thick enough to cut. It reminded me of certain feverish nights back in prison, the kind where you knew something bad was about to go down, even if you couldn't explain why. And that was the reason I kept going. Too much was riding on this job for me to turn back just because I had a bad feeling. According to my watch, I had less than 2 hours to clean up whatever was down here. I took a deep breath and I pushed through the door. An ugly green and brown plaid couch, brass lamps, a couple of wooden chairs, shelves with little porcelain figurines. A tall clock stood ticking away the minutes in a corner. If it had been standing in someone's grandparents' house a few decades ago, it might have made sense, but not 15 feet below a warehouse floor. There were no footprints on the mold-colored shag carpet, no candy wrappers, empty cans, or any signs that anybody had been down here recently. And yet the place felt unmistakably lived in, as though whoever or whatever called it home had left for a moment but might be back at any time. 2 other doors, identical to the one that I had just opened, stood on the walls to my right and left. As I moved deeper into the room, it was hard not to imagine the closet monsters from my childhood hiding behind one of them. I figured I would start with the room on the left. The water in my bucket sloshed uncomfortably with every step I took. Apart from the ticking of the grandfather clock, it seemed like the only sound left in the world. I was reaching for the handle when I heard a creak. I hadn't imagined it. The white paneled door on the wall behind me had opened just a crack. There was only darkness on the other side. I shouted, "Hello?" But it came out as a dry whisper. Of course, there was no answer. The lights were off in the next room, but I was reluctant to feel along the wall for a switch, afraid maybe of what my hand might brush against in the dark. With one last nervous look over my shoulder at the cracked open door, I turned my headlamp back on and kept going. The space was a nursery, or at least that was the closest comparison that I could think of. Smiling bears and trains covered the wallpaper. Toys were scattered across the floor. A lamp stood in the middle of the room, but its cord was too short to reach the wall, and there were no outlets to plug it into. Beneath it was a wooden crib with a heap of blankets in its center. What was I expected to do here? Pick up the toys, change the sheets? I hope not. Because the longer I looked at that crib, the more sure I was that something was moving inside of it. I would leave the nursery as it was, I decided, and if Clemens had asked, I would just tell him that I hadn't known how to proceed. And there was only one more place to check after that, and then I could go home. I'm back in the living room. That feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. An empty glass had appeared on the end table. I thought that I could smell the rich, spicy scent of bourbon in the air, but the only thing moving in the room seemed to be the pendulum of the grandfather clock. With my heart in my throat, I tiptoed across the ugly shag carpet. By the time that I was halfway across the room, I was sure that there was someone behind me, but at the same time I was too scared to look. Like a child in a nightmare, I told myself that if I didn't acknowledge the presence, it might just go away. Tick-tock, tick-tock. As I reached for the handle of the far door, I felt a breath on my neck. "I've got to tell you something," an elderly male voice rasped. I screamed and swung a wide haymaker punch at whoever was beside me, but my fist connected with empty air. I shook my head. I must have imagined it, I thought. I was letting this weird little basement get to me. All I had to do was check behind one more door, I reminded myself, and then I could go home. I flung open the third door. It was a hallway, one so long that I couldn't see its end or count the doors spaced out at odd intervals along it. Unlike the two other basement rooms, this place looked like it hadn't been cleaned in decades. Dusty black gunk clotted the edges of the laminate floor and the fluorescent lights overhead. Old furniture and other junk was scattered haphazardly throughout the place. There was no way that I would be getting all of this cleaned up in only 2 hours. I felt a burst of anger toward Clemens for giving me a job that I was sure to fail. I wondered whether he had ever been inside of this place himself. If he hadn't, or if he had taken one look and fled, I wouldn't have blamed him. From the figure in the crib beneath the lightless lamp, to the eerie ticking of that grandfather clock, everything about this place was wrong. Even the chairs in front of me felt off. They were all squat and tiny except for one, which seemed far too tall and narrow for any ordinary human to use. I backed away slowly, for some reason reluctant to breathe the stuffy air of the place. How the hell with this, I thought. If the alternative to staying here another minute was life on the street, well then so be it. Pride was the only thing that kept me from running as I returned to the living room, and I made my way across to the stairway door. I pulled it open, only to find myself back in the nursery. The crib was empty now, the blanket crumpled on the floor. The small army of plastic toys lined up in rows facing the door, as though they were expecting me. And maybe it was just the twitchy movement of my headlamp's light, but something seemed to be skittering across the ceiling. I closed the door, wishing that I could lock it, and I tried the next one. I had finally found stairs. But here the steps led downward. There were no lights that I could see, and the bottom was too far away from my headlamp to reach. I scratched my head. It shouldn't have been possible, and yet The staircase that I had taken to get here, it was gone. I tested each door again with the same result. How the hell was I going to get out of here? I decided to try the long, dusty hallway first. There were more possibilities of finding a way out there. And besides, I couldn't stand the idea of going back into that awful nursery or further down those lightless stairs. At least this place, the living room, appeared to be safe. Or so I thought, until I noticed the old man on the sofa.
"Hello, William,"
He croaked in a gravelly smoker's voice, the same one that I had heard before.
"Why don't you take a seat?"
The old man had greeted me by name, but I had never seen him before in my life. With his worn-out overalls and scrawny build, he seemed harmless, but I didn't trust his smile or the way that he patted the cushion beside him. I turned and walked deliberately toward the hallway door. No bony hand gripped my shoulder. There was no inhuman screech from the couch. The stranger, whoever he was, simply let me go. And somehow that was even worse. The door squeaked shut behind me. Unlike the nursery, the hallway appeared unchanged. I approached the first door. It was no different from the others, but I thought I saw the outline of a shape beneath the white paint. An X that had been carved, or maybe scratched into its surface. The white paint seemed to have grown over it somehow, like moss slowly covering a skull. Was it a warning? Had someone else been here before me? It was the same for the next door and the next. I counted 36 doors before I finally found one that wasn't marked, but something made me hesitate before I opened it. I would have sworn that I heard a woman crying on the other side, but something was off about the pitch and tone, like something was trying to imitate a sound that it didn't have the right anatomy to make. I checked my watch. I had been down here for over 2 hours. By now, hundreds of workers should have been arriving at the warehouse, driving forklifts and activating machinery, but there wasn't a single sound overheard. It took me a moment to realize that, at some point, my watch had stopped working completely. For all I knew, I had been down here even longer. I went back to trying doors. The same spaces kept repeating. The nursery, the lightless staircase downward, the living room. The only difference was that now, whenever that ugly green and brown couch appeared through the crack in the door, I knew that I would find the old man sitting there, waiting patiently as though he knew that in the end, I would give up and join him. Once he even raised his glass of bourbon and toasted me. Whenever I saw the nursery on the other side of a door or heard the echo of a baby's giggle, I turned back immediately. Of all the eerie spaces that I had found down here, it somehow seemed the worst. The most hateful, malicious, and eager to trap me. Once I wasn't quick enough, and the second before I tugged the door shut, I caught a glimpse of a wide, child-sized eye glaring at me through the gap. The downward staircase, too, was a no-go for me. I was pretty sure that was where the weeping woman was, and besides, I didn't dare to go any further down than I had already gone. About 30 tries later, I finally found a version of the living room that appeared to be unoccupied. The lamp was switched off and the couch was empty. I breathed a sigh of relief and I hurried across it, aiming for the place where the way back to the factory should have been. The next thing I knew, a wooden bar crashed into my throat. It was the bar of a chair and now it had pinned me against the wall.
"You're gonna listen to me now, boy."
The old man snarled, his face twisted by hate.
I'm gonna show you what it's like.
His jaw distended, dropping down to his chest as he screamed into my face. His breath tasted like cheap bourbon, cheaper cigarettes, and some rotting, half-digested meal. I could barely even breathe it in. My windpipe was being crushed, and I had been in enough scraps to know that if I didn't break free in the first few seconds, well, then I never would. But the old man's grip was statue strong and just as solid. Fighting him, I realized, was gonna be useless. The rickety wooden chair, on the other hand. Out of habit, or maybe out of suspicion, I had kept my plastic cleaning bucket with me throughout everything that I had been through. And besides the usual cloths and rubber gloves and clothes pinned to its side, there was a monkey wrench for tightening leaky pipes. And that was what I grabbed for now. Although more strength left my body with each failed breath, I slammed the wrench into the chair's backrest until it splinted and finally broke loose. As the wood shattered, I ducked, kicked the bucket open behind me, and felt blindly for the door. I was running through it before I even considered what might be on the other side. When I realized that I was back in the brightly lit upward stairway, I could have cried for joy. The beige wall, the tan carpet, the black emptiness of the warehouse above. It was all just like before. I pulled the door shut behind me and I hurried up the steps. I had made it. I was back on the warehouse floor. But where was my cleaning cart? I had parked it right here, at the top of the stairs, hadn't I? The beam of my headlamp caught on something. A man, splayed face down on the concrete floor. He had dark hair like me, and he was even wearing the same uniform. And for a moment, I had the awful sensation that I was staring at my own corpse. My headlamp flickered and went out. I scrambled to switch on the second that hung from my belt. Its light was dimmer than the first, but it was something. The body at least hadn't moved. I knew that I should just keep walking, but I felt drawn to the stranger on the floor. Up close, I could see that his dark blue jumpsuit was torn and stained in several places. It looked as though chunks of flesh had been torn out of him and eaten. Part of me wanted to flip him over to see his face. Part of me was afraid to. It was only then that I realized that no shelves appeared in the light of my headlamp, no girders overhead, no emergency exit lights on the walls. This wasn't where I was supposed to be. A sound somewhere between a moan and a howl echoed through the darkness. I retreated toward the stairs, but froze when I heard footsteps coming toward me. They were calm and unhurried, as though whoever was out there was unbothered by the blood-curdling howl and the half-eaten janitor on the floor. Before long, I could see their bulky silhouette and smell the peppery odor that they brought with them. I was sure that I recognized it. "Dale?" I ventured, my voice barely above a whisper. The man who had hired me approached with a grin. He didn't stop until our noses were nearly touching, but I was so relieved to see a familiar face that I didn't question the uncomfortable closeness. "And death only lasts a few seconds," Dale told me, his grin widening. "But hell is forever." And then my boss's face exploded. Fragments of bone splattered across my face and the front of my uniform. Clement's now headless torso collapsed on the floor. I stared ahead stupidly, unable to believe what had just happened, until another one of those moaning howls echoed and reverberated through my bones. Whatever had made it was closer now, a lot closer. I tried to wipe the rusty taste of blood from my mouth as I rushed back down the stairs, but I knew that it was going to take hours to clean all of that crimson gunk from my face and hair, and that there would be no washing away the memories of what I had just seen. I reached, almost reluctantly, to remove a chunk of something stuck behind my ear, but as I passed through the doorway, I felt it disappear. The stickiness and tiny chunks of bone were gone, as though I had dreamed up the whole thing. I was back inside the hallway, and I thought I knew what had happened to whoever who had made those X's on the doors. He had gotten somewhere that he thought was safe, and then he paid a terrible price for his overconfidence. And maybe he wasn't the only one. I realized with a sinking feeling that the door that I had come out of was not where I had gone in, and I no longer had a line of sight to the door at the end of the corridor. It had been my lifeline, even though I knew there was no way to be sure that the room behind it was still the same. I looked from one side to the other, paralyzed by indecision, and then the lights overhead began to go out. The darkness swept toward me like a wave.
Did you remember to bring your spare batteries?
A voice horribly similar to Clement's called out from the darkness.
Well, did you?
That insane laughter pursued me as I ran. In the last second before the darkness swept over me, I chose a door at random and I flung myself through. I was back in the unlit downward stairwell, and all I had was a much dimmer headlamp to show the way ahead. I thought about what Clemens had said about the batteries and I shivered. Maybe it was just me, but its beam seemed even dimmer, a little more flickery than it had been before. Had he known somehow? Was he taunting me? And glad that it was soon to go out. Something pounded against the door behind me, rattling on its hinges. My encounter with the old man had given me the impression that the things who haunted this place couldn't leave their spaces unless I left an opening for them. But could I really take that chance? I continued downward into the blackness. The stairs became a little steeper, narrower, and taller with every step that I took, until I found myself paying more attention to my foot placement than whatever might be ahead. Before long, a familiar sound echoed from below. I didn't want to believe it. It was the sobbing of the woman that I had heard before. A pale face appeared at the limits of my headlamp's light.
Why didn't you help?
It asked, gazing at me with black-ringed, bloodshot eyes.
Why didn't anyone help?
The thing on the stairs pulled itself along the walls spider-like. Its limbs were bent, broken, and wrong, but somehow they supported its weight. I didn't want to take another step toward it, but my only way out was forward. So I closed my eyes and charged. A hand, long-fingered and icy cold, clamped down on my shoulder and stopped me dead. With a scream, I unzipped my jacket and I flung myself free. The thing's grip closed on empty air. I tumbled down the ladder's steep stairs and realized that if I didn't stop soon, then I would be in a free fall. I braced myself against the walls to halt my plunge. Behind me, I could hear her coming. I climbed backwards down the stairs, knowing that I wasn't fast enough, knowing that I still couldn't see the bottom. I prayed for another door to appear. If it did, I swore to myself that I would take it, no matter what was on the other side. I would sit on the sofa beside that eerie old man and listen to whatever he had to say, no matter how horrible it was. The effort of bracing myself against the wall had left my muscles weak. My foot slipped, and my sweat-slickened hands didn't have the strength to cling on to those finger-narrow stairs. Suddenly, I was falling again. And then I saw the door. It was upside down on the wall in front of me, approaching fast. A faint, ghoulish red glow seeping through its corners. I grabbed the handle and felt the cool metal slide through my fingers. But I held on. My weight swung the door open. I kicked against empty air and scrambled blindly through it. My fingernails scraped against cold concrete. Wherever I was, it was nearly as dark as the staircase that I had just left. The door slammed shut behind me. I had pushed myself to my feet and was turning to inspect my surroundings when the beam of a powerful flashlight lit up my back. I heard a pistol slide loose from its holster. "All right, buddy," a deep male voice shouted, "and put your hands up and turn around. Slow." The doorway that I had come through was gone. In its place stood a stout, middle-aged security guard. His fingers shook against the pistol in his hand. I did as I was told. I saw myself as he must have seen me. Hair wild, face pale and smeared with grime, my shirt ripped. I told the guard that I was the new night custodian and that I had been hired by a guy named Dale Clemens. Instead of calming him down, my explanation only seemed to make the guard more nervous. "Clemens? Listen, buddy, I already didn't like the looks of you, but if you're friends with that evil son of a, well, we're gonna have a problem." It was only the look of pure confusion on my face, I think, that made him lower his weapon. He introduced himself as Avery Rasfeld, walked me back to the offices, and told me to have a seat. He hit the buttons on a vending machine in a specific sequence to get us both a free soda. According to the clock on the wall, only 10 minutes had passed since I had first walked down those stairs. Avery explained that everybody who worked in the place knew about Dale Clemens. He seemed like a nice enough manager, until one sunny Friday morning the week after his divorce. He strangled his father-in-law and beat the wife and kid to death. He even poisoned the dog with antifreeze. Then he drove here and blew his brains all over the warehouse floor, just as everybody was clocking in. Avery sighed. In fact, if I remember right, he did it right around the spot where I ran into you. After the security guard went quiet, I told him my version of what had happened in the warehouse that night. I didn't expect him to take me seriously, but Avery nodded like he had understood. Then he took out his phone and pulled up a newspaper article from a couple of years before. The accompanying photo showed the man I knew as Dale Clemens, as well as a familiar-looking, skinny grandfather with an infant sitting in his lap. A woman stood behind the green and brown plaid couch, with her arms wrapped around her family. She was smiling into the camera. The last time that I had seen her, she had been crawling up the stairs toward me with murder in her eyes. They always seemed like such a happy family, but it turns out that he was abusing her for years. All of that hatred. Avery went on shaking his head. All of that bitterness. I mean, where does it go? What happens to it after we die? And do the dead hate the living for all the life that they've missed out on? I don't have any answers, but I wonder about it enough to believe your story. I thought about the entities that I had met down there, wherever down there was, and I thought about the things that they had tried to do to me. The old man cutting off my oxygen, the woman crushing my shoulder with her grip, the bites that had been taken out of the dead stranger by a canine spirit still hungry for something other than poison. And the child. How would it have felt about all of the opportunities that had been stolen from it? How would it feel towards those like me, who just took life for granted? With each passing second, the memory of what had happened to me in that impossible basement, it felt like a dream. And then another question occurred to me. I asked Avery if I was the only person that he had ever caught here overnight. "Yep, you sure are," the guard muttered, scratching his chin. But I find things sometimes. An abandoned car in the parking lot. A bus ticket in the middle of the warehouse floor. Sometimes I find the rear door unlocked, and when I pass through it, there's this smell in the air. And you know what? It reminds me of that cologne that Dale used to wear. Avery slapped his knees and got to his feet. "Well, anyway, first shift is going to start in about 15 minutes. Let's get you cleaned up and out of here before I have to answer any awkward questions. And by the way," he added, "I'm no doctor, but you might want to have somebody take a look at that bruise on your shoulder. You know, the one that's shaped like a handprint." The irony of my story is that I became a park ranger to avoid the stressors of a grown-up job, as my father would call it in the real world. The grind of banal and inconsequential office work, the drab and dreary gray of corporate life, and the dangers of working in a major city. That's the worst part of it all. I got out of the city to get away from danger. After a near run-in with death at the hands of a gunman who had emptied my pockets and left me, thankfully, with my life. Nature to me was supposed to be an escape from all that. But when I took the job in a Midwestern national park, the name of which I won't share with you, I learned very quickly that danger garbs itself in so many different ways. You see, in the city, danger was loud and fierce and immediate. And I'll admit that in those rural crevices of the world far from man and civilization, danger can be much the same. When facing a wild animal, for instance, the fear response is much the same. I didn't go into this link of work with the belief that I would be in a bubble, as life is always a risk in and of itself. Nature would bring a new set of unpredictable risks in the form of wildlife, and I was aware of that. I was prepared for it. I wasn't prepared for that other kind of danger, which people don't talk about, or at least the ones who do talk about it are met with disbelief the majority of the time. I'm talking about unearthly danger. I'm talking about things that don't align with the general public's dominant belief system, certainly in the Western world, about everything in life having a rational explanation. About there being no such things as paranormal or spiritual anomalies who sit at a variance with the natural world around them. I never really leaned one way or the other when it came to such talk. My grandfather told me about the time that he had seen a ghost as a boy, and I simply nodded, perching atop my fence, unwilling to take a stance one way or the other. Well, having seen what I've seen since starting my job as a park ranger in this vast backcountry wilderness, I now have very firm and fixed beliefs. There are things in the woods, and there is no grounded or logical explanation for them. Dick, is that right? Asked Harry, the gray-haired 70-something-year-old ranger who was showing me the ropes when we met at his watchtower. My eyes widened. I beg your pardon. The man frowned and looked down at his clipboard on the desk. It says here your name's Dick. It was my turn to frown. Richard, I go by Richard. Said Harry, and then he grumbled to himself, crossed out the name with a ballpoint pen, and tutted to himself as he wrote down my proper name. That'll be Graham that you met then, at the interview I mean. A bit of a dick himself, truth be told. Fancies himself a comedian, but doesn't quite know how to walk the line between comedy and dickery, I finished. Harry chuckled. Someone ought to put that word in the dictionary with Graham's name right next to it. Yeah, dickery, that's Graham to a T. Sure you wouldn't rather be a poet than a ranger? No, sir, I said with a shake of my head. You're pretty young. 27. That means I have fresh legs, I said, proving my point by nodding at the door to the tower, outside which were hundreds of metal treads that I had swiftly ascended. I had not broken a sweat, but I was certainly stifling my labored breathing so as to make a good impression. Harry nodded. Those steps are a killer for most of us, that's for sure. But being a park ranger takes more than fresh legs, Richard. There's a reason I keep around dicks like Graham. For all his faults, he knows these parts like the back of his hand, and he keeps hikers, campers, and his fellow rangers safe. Every life that he's saved has earned him a little bit of. Harry paused to look down at my crossed-out nickname on his clipboard. A little bit of dickery. Understood, sir, I said, sweating as I feared that I was about to be fired before even starting the job. But all those rangers had to start somewhere too, right? Oh, they did, agreed Harry. But I give this speech to every new hire, so don't take it personally, Richard. This is more for your sake. You moved from the city, didn't ya? That's right. Well, the forest ain't like the city. No, it certainly isn't, sir. But that's why I came out here. This is what I wanted. I needed to get away from the concrete and back into the outdoors. Well, the actual outdoors, I mean. I was floundering, sweating under the pressure. Word dueling with Harry was more fatiguing than the climb up the metal staircase had been. What I mean, sir, is that there's a beauty to nature. I'm not going back to the city. This is the life that I want now. Harry wasn't convinced. But you could just as easily have found a job out in the town, couldn't ya? A nice normal office job. And then you could have spent your mornings taking a nice stroll around the park. Wouldn't that have achieved the same goal? No, sir, I want to be a ranger. I used to be a Boy Scout and I loved the great outdoors. I loved hiking, I loved camping, exploring. I don't just want to go for pleasant strolls, sir. I want to work out here in nature, with the beauty of all this around me. Harry sighed. Yeah, that's always the response I get. Don't fault me for trying, at least, when we next talk. My furrowed brow deepened its folds. Sir, I'm not quite sure that I understand. Why do you always try to talk new recruits out of the job? I gotta test whether they're up to it, I guess, he supposed. The ones who are, they can withstand a little bit of resistance. Of course, you think a slightly hostile talk is bad, then you're gonna have a hell of a shock when you work your first late shift. I don't think this is hostile, sir, I said, an involuntary gulp snaking up my throat. I'm just curious. What should I know about this line of work? What's gonna shock me about the late shift? I want to be prepared. Ain't a way to prepare for this job, boy, said Harry. Abigail will show you the ropes today, and hopefully you'll have a nice, easygoing non-event of a shift. I pray for that boy. I really do. I hooked my thumbs through my belt purely to keep them steady, hide their jitters from the boss who was judging my every move, gauging my readiness for this job. I'll be fine, sir. I'll learn quickly and I'll keep people safe. And to make it all better, I won't cause you any grief like Graham. Harry didn't laugh this time. He was wholly solemn and sincere by this point, as he nodded at the door and gave me a final piece of advice. Head on down to see her at the station now. She'll be waiting for ya. One last warning, which I'm sure that Abigail will give ya, but I want to lodge it in your head first. No whistling after dark, Richard. I didn't frown or answer back or do anything that might give away my nerves. I just nodded as firmly as I could, and then I willed my legs to steadily back out of the office. I managed to do so without tripping over my own heels, which was nothing short of a miracle. Then I descended the stairs, allowing myself to let out a big sigh of relief and wipe a bead of sweat from my brow. Once I was well out of eyeshot from the large window panes which lined the four sides of the elevated watch post. As I made my way down the stairs and then through the forest towards Abigail's ground level station, I started to wonder whether Harry might be right, whether I had in fact made a terrible mistake by taking on this job. Not because I actually feared anything in the woods, but rather the rangers themselves. Firstly, there had been Graham, the middle-aged man with a slightly abrasive sense of humor. I had noted that much with his thinly veiled insults at my expense during the interview, and I hadn't even seen that he had put my name down incorrectly on the clipboard. It was one hell of a shock to me when I got the job, because I had been absolutely certain that the man had hated me. But given what Harry had said, that was just Graham, with his penchant for dickery. I could have dealt with that. One unfunny colleague, fine. But Harry was a different kettle of fish. He didn't frustrate me, he unnerved me. He hadn't said a single thing about what I should fear about the forest, other than what I might infer from that crumb of guidance about not whistling after dark. It was more about what he didn't say, or should say, what his eyes said. Those old, withered brown pupils, weathered by not time but things seen. Terrible things I sensed, and I've never sensed such a thing about a person's eyes before. There we go, I thought with a sigh. Abigail's log cabin post coming into view. You've been a ranger for 5 minutes and you're already entertaining superstitious thinking about men whose eyes tell ghost stories. You could walk away right now, Richard. You could find a better job in the town like Harry suggested. You would still be in the sticks and you would still be surrounded by nature, able to go on pleasant country walks whenever you wish so. You would still be in a far better position than you were in the city. That would surely be enough. But it wouldn't. I knew that. I wasn't going back to the corporate grind, even at some small town marketing firm, which was about all I would have been qualified to do in the area, save for jobs at local diners or retail stores perhaps. None of that interested me, however. The woods did. Harry's speech for new recruits was a test, I decided, and I was going to pass it with flying colors by shrugging it off, proving that I would not so easily be fazed by a stern glance and ominous tone, and I certainly wouldn't be fazed by some obscure rule, a ban on whistling in the forest of all things. I puffed my chest out, mustered up my steadiest disposition, and I strolled into Abigail's cabin with as much confidence as I could fake. The attractive young ranger inside, perhaps 10 years older than me, seemed to read me immediately. She squinted, eyed me up and down, and smiled as she put her hands on her hips. Looks like Harry worked his magic, as always, she sighed. I went through the same 5 years ago. I smiled weakly. He's an interesting man. Oh, he's a few cents short of $1, said Abigail with a giggle. I laughed. Well, given you're still working here after 5 years, I'm assuming it's just a little test of character or something for new recruits, right? I get it, I need to be hardy. I shouldn't be scared of the forest if I want to be a real ranger. I wouldn't say that's the case at all, said Abigail, still smiling warmly, but speaking with absolute sincerity. If you want to be a real ranger, you should absolutely be scared of the forest. I paled a little. I'm sure. Bears, wolves. Oh, sure, she replied, but there are more than animals in these parts. People, I said. Right, that makes sense. Oh yes, we've run into a fair few problems there over the years. But there's something else, Richard. I won't skirt around it because it seems like Harry did, and that just isn't fair to you. There's something in these woods that, well, after 5 years, I still don't know how to explain. Harry told you about our rule, didn't he? Well, we've got plenty of rules as rangers, of course. I'm sure that you read the contract. But I'm talking about that one rule in particular, which probably stood out to you. I nodded. No whistling after dark. No whistling after dark, Abigail repeated. If you whistle, it'll hear you and it'll come running. What will? I asked. People have lots of different stories about it, she answered cryptically. Some of them would make you laugh, I'm sure. Most of them you probably heard at one point or another. All wrong, all of them, every last one. But not wholly wrong. I guess there's a grain of truth in every folk story. And just because everybody gets it wrong doesn't mean there's no such thing as. She paused, seemed to choose a word in her mind, and then rethought and picked a better one, or one that would perhaps not draw a laugh out of me. Evil. Evil, I repeated with a raised brow. Evil, she asserted. It's evil whatever it is, and it'll come if you whistle. I don't know whether it's an animal or... No, that's a lie, I do know. It's nothing of this world, Richard. It just isn't. I've seen it about 12 times in my stint as a ranger, and I was in denial at first, but I'm not anymore. The things that I've seen it do, and the things that I've heard and thought and felt just don't make sense. Describe it to me, I said, not as a barked order but with gingerness and curiosity, as I didn't want to be rude to my new coworker, no matter how delusional she seemed. People talk about seeing strange bears and Sasquatches in these parts, Abigail said with a sigh. I think they've all seen this thing instead. It ain't a bear and it ain't Bigfoot. It looks like it has a form, a body, hair, and animal-like claws and paws. At first, it looks like something that might in the right light make sense, but that's because it always comes out at night when it's cloaked by the dark. That's how it tricks, you see. You tell yourself, I don't know what I saw, but it had to have been an animal. It had to have been. And it goes about, anonymous and undetected by the world at large, wreaking hell wherever it goes. And it is a creature of hell. It ain't a peaceful thing, make no mistake, Richard. I'm only alive because I've had someone to guide me in those early days, and I put his lessons to practice when I eventually faced the thing for myself. Now I'm gonna pass those lessons on to you. Did you whistle? I asked. Is that why I came for you? She frowned. You think I'd be stupid enough to break that rule once, let alone 12 times? I shrugged. You might have been curious the first time. She nodded. I was, but I didn't want to get on Graham's bad side. Of course it was Graham who had trained her and saved her skin, I thought, resisting the urge to roll my eyes, and that's how he earns his dickery credits from Harry, by saving rangers and using that as a shield for his future transgressions. So if you didn't whistle and the thing didn't hear you, I started. Abigail shook her head. That rule ain't some magic path to safety, Richard. It's kind of like telling campers not to leave food out in the open. It's a good rule to follow as it stops bears or other wildlife from being attracted to their campsites, but it doesn't mean those campers aren't going to run into bears at all. You get my drift? Sure, I said. She sighed. Oh, you don't yet, Richard, but you will. And I'm guessing you still want this job, given your peppy attitude. I do. Well, don't say I didn't warn ya. People go missing in these parts, and the rook's nearly always to blame. The sun set quickly, and maybe it had set just as quickly when I had been in the city the night before, but I certainly hadn't noticed. The light pollution might have been to blame for them, or perhaps the high-rises were to blame, and the stacks of glass and steel piled up to the heavens, blotting out all, of course. I never really looked up, and that might also have been the problem. Everyone kept their eyes to the ground in that urban sprawl. So even if I got out of the office before sunset, which was a rarity in the wintertime anyway, or I ventured out and about in the city at the weekend during my time off, I wouldn't really watch the sun glide across the horizon. This was something that I hadn't really witnessed since I was a boy, and it was beautiful. I bet you never get sick of this view, I told Abigail as we did the rounds, watching the sky turn orange through openings between patches of leaf canopy overhead. She shrugged. I rolled my eyes. I guess I'll be the same in a year or so, taking nature for granted. Oh, it's not that, Richard. The park is beautiful, the sunset's beautiful. All of it is beautiful. But I just prefer the day shift. It's hard to appreciate a sunset, no matter how gorgeous the shade of sky, when you know what comes next. The rest of that first shift went by without incident, and Abigail looked a little flushed in the cheeks, as if she could tell what I was thinking, that this park ranger and all of the park rangers must have lost their marbles if they were true believers of a ghost story about some Sasquatch-like entity in the forest. And truthfully, that was exactly what I was thinking. But I offered her a kind smile to let her know that I was friendly, to let her know that I wasn't going to engage in any dickery like Graham. I would respect her beliefs. And this was how our joint shifts went for many weeks, day in and day out, the same routine. Abigail showed me the ropes, and nightfall came, my shift ended, and there was nothing to report. I ran into my first black bear at the end of the first month, which was terrifying, but I was far enough away that it had passed me by, on the trail of some better meal, or on its merry way back to its habitat perhaps. It was after 2 months that it first happened, something strange I mean, not necessarily frightening but definitely strange. I came across a tree on a trail with a puddle of dry blood at its base, and the bark was covered in scratch marks all the way up to the branches, but not a small spattering of scratch marks. No, these grooves cut into the tree by razor-sharp talons or claws were coating at least 9/10 of the bark, to the extent that more of the pale inner sapwood of the tree was showing than its dark bark on the outer layer. I radioed it in to Abigail, and that was when the sickness set in. My radio made the most awful squealing noise, as if I had tuned it into the space between frequencies, before finally locking onto hers. The radio was an old piece of junk, and I had been warned about that, but as I talked into the radio telling Abigail what had happened, I became aware of this awful nausea washing over me, and this feeling of something approaching. Of course, as soon as I explained the situation, she came running. She was at my spot within 5 minutes, and my flashlight caught her own pale face, as if she too were revealing the sapwood beneath her firm veil of bark, usually so adept at concealing the terrors which I knew she always kept close to the surface. You see, she had knocked off the talk about the whistling, about the evil thing in the woods after that first shift, and I think she did so for my sake. but I always sensed her fear any time that we were on shift together. And now as she looked up at the tree that I had stumbled across, that fear was right there at the forefront. Back to my station. Now. The blood's dry, I commented, nodding at the puddle at the bottom of the bark. I think whatever did this is long gone. Oh, it's never long gone, she murmured with a shiver. It's always close. Now keep your voice down and come with me. But I've got to finish my patrol of the... Harry will understand, she interrupted, starting back. She wasn't going to ask me again, I knew that. And her desperation to flee that place, post-haste, was enough for me too. For the very first time in my short career as a park ranger, I set aside my arrogance and considered that maybe, just maybe, I should listen to those who had been in these parts for longer than I had. I wasn't a total ass, of course, as I had diligently followed the rule about not whistling. Then again, I had never been much of a whistler anyway, and I think I may have only been doing what I was told because, as crazy as I thought Abigail and Harry were, I didn't want to be fired, and certainly not over something as foolish as whistling on the job. I struggled to match Abigail's pace as we hurried back to the station. I thought that I had got myself into good shape with my new life as a park ranger, but this woman 10 years my senior proved that I still had a long way to go. And I couldn't help thinking as we raced back that if a bear were hunting us down, I would be the slow poke that it would devour first. And that thought was enough to hurry my scarper and dash into the ranger station behind Abigail. The door slammed behind us, and I was startled to find Graham standing there. I thought you two were lost out there, he said. I came as soon as, Richard radioed. Abigail panted. We were only gone a few minutes. That's all it takes, Graham said. So you left the tower unattended? Asked Abigail. He scoffed. Would you rather I watch for forest fires than check that you two are okay? No, but, she sighed. Look, we're fine, Graham, so you can go back to your tower now. Probably safer up there than in here anyway. He shook his head. We'll all be safe right where we are, as long as we stay inside and stay calm until sunrise. Won't Harry chew us out over ditching our posts and patrols? I asked. Graham and Abigail looked at me as if I were adult, and perhaps I was adult at the time. But then their faces changed, even Graham's demeanor uncharacteristically softened. They remembered, I think, that I was new to the job, and I thank them for that now, because I would learn in no time at all just what terrified them about the forest. I would learn that they weren't so insane after all. Don't worry about Harry, said Graham. He'll understand. I told him that, Abigail added. But Richard doesn't know what he saw, Graham. He nodded. I know that, and best we keep it that way for his sake. I'm standing right here, you know, I said, placing hands on my hips. I'm not a total buffoon. I've gathered that you're blaming those tree marks on your monster in the forest. And Graham grumbled. Don't mock us, Richard. Am I not Dick? I quipped. Yeah, you are right now, he quipped back. I laughed. Yeah, that's rich coming from you. Oh, don't squabble like children, chastised Abigail. Both of you are raising your voices, so just zip your lips if you have nothing nice to say. And nothing to say quietly for that matter. Hey, as long as we whistle, we're fine, I said. That's right, ain't it? Ain't that simple, and Graham replied. Somebody was out on that trail, a young woman, a hiker. Maybe she whistled, maybe she didn't, but either way, she's gone now. Plenty of people go on this trail. Go, I repeated. He nodded. I saw her earlier. Never clocked her leaving the site. I just hoped that she had slipped through my fingers, but, well, maybe she did leave. I'm being silly. My brain finally caught up. "I'm sorry, you're saying that wasn't animal blood?" "No, he's not saying that," Abigail said, shaking her head. "Graham, we don't know that wasn't a rabbit or something." And Graham hummed as if to soothe himself. I had never seen him rattled before, and it might have been enjoyable if I hadn't been rattled too. "I don't know, Abigail, I just don't feel right about any of this. Either way, it's the Rook, it has to be." Abigail groaned. "Oh, don't call it that." "I wondered whether it had a name," I said. "Why'd you call it the Rook?" "I ain't talking to you about it, 'cause you're still mocking me," said Graham. "I'm not mocking." "Well, you don't believe us." "Is that a crime?" I asked. "I have no reason to believe a story about some undiscovered animal roaming the park, hunting down tourists and being mistaken by locals for what? A Sasquatch." Graham shot Abigail a stern look. "You told him that. No wonder he's not taking us seriously." "Look, I'm not trying to be an ass, but you have to understand how crazy it sounds," I said. "Those marks were made by a bear or something. And maybe you're right, maybe that young hiker is in danger. Maybe we should even phone it in. I hope she's okay, and I hope that that's just animal blood out there. But whatever happened will have an explanation. Everything has an explanation." "Not everything, Richard," said Abigail. "I'm sorry, but not everything." "Well, should I phone in about the woman that you saw?" I asked. Maybe I missed her," Graham whispered, eyes becoming despondent. "Maybe she left the trail back to the car park and I just didn't see. It was a long walk back to the tower, you know. She might have left before I got back up there, and I can't see the parking lot even from up there, so maybe her car is gone. Maybe if we go there and look, her car will be gone." "We're not going there and looking," said Abigail. "We're staying inside where it's safe." As the two park rangers bickered, I wandered over the front window looking out at the surrounding trees, shawled in night. I don't know whether I was drawn there to get away from the racket of my two arguing colleagues or to answer the beckon of the raised hairs on my skin. I told myself at the time that the fear only kicked in once I got to the window. But as I look back now, these many weeks later, I am fairly certain that I felt the hairs raise on my skin first. I'm fairly certain that some primal fear drove me to the glass pane, or perhaps deeper than a primal fear, for I finally accepted the existence of something beyond the earthly and beyond the primal as I looked out into the night. About 50 yards away from our cabin was a silhouette. A tall silhouette of something broad and, if the scant moonlight spilling through the trees could be believed, coated in fur from head to toe. It would have made sense for it to be a bear, and if it had been, I would have felt fear as I had a month earlier when I came face to face with such a beast in the light of day. I remembered that feeling. The fear, the freeze response that my body assumed. I remembered exactly how I had felt when confronted with a black bear. It was terror that filled my body, but an unexplainable and grounded terror. This was different. This feeling as I eyed the silhouette in the near distance was like nothing that I had ever felt in my nearly 3 decades of life. It was like as my mouth had opened to soundlessly scream, my very soul had been vomited up, had splattered against the window pane, only to stare back at me in some outer body experience. I suddenly understood Abigail and Graham perfectly, understood what I had dismissed as a ghost story because they had no concrete evidence. There was no concrete evidence other than seeing and perhaps being in the general vicinity of the thing that Graham called the Rook. It stood on what could have been hind legs, which would explain why locals thought it an emaciated bear standing up. Perhaps, and those locals would argue with the crazy locals who claimed it to be the Sasquatch. It seemed as Harry, Abigail, and Graham had been trying to explain to me for weeks that all the theories were wrong. This wasn't an animal, not even a mythical one. All I knew for sure as I eyed the thing moving around jankily in the distance was that this was something pretending to be alive. It took me possibly about 10 or 20 seconds of trying before I managed to get a hoarse sound to creep out of my slack jaw. I think Abigail and Graham wouldn't have noticed me if I had remained wordless, for they were too busy arguing among themselves as to what they should do about the missing girl, and whether they should call Harry and whether the thing was out there. "Richard," said Abigail, starting towards me. "Richard, what's—" The shape moved, disappearing into the trees, and I stumbled backwards, letting out a horrified gasp. Abigail caught me, and Graham immediately darted to the window pane, looking out into the night. "You saw it, didn't you? You saw the rook." What is it?" I asked, shivering as Abigail tried to steady me. She clearly sensed that I was on the verge of passing out from the shock of feeling whatever I had just felt. "Oh, not such a cocky little guy now, are ya?" asked Graham. "Oh, shut up, you douche," Abigail said. "Richard was only being an ass to you because you've been an ass to him since day one." And Graham muttered something under his breath, acting as a child being scolded by his mother. "And for that matter, I was exactly the same when I started," continued Abigail. "I didn't believe a word of it until the first night that I saw it." She shivered. "It was my fault." Graham shook his head. "It wasn't your fault." "It was," she asserted. "It was. I made the sound and I drew the rook to us." "You didn't whistle, you did as you were told." "It sounded like a whistle though," Abigail said. "It's any high-pitched sound, Richard. That's what I think. I drank from my water flask and the way the lid scraped against the bottle, metal against metal, was shrill and squeaky. I drew it out of hiding." "Hey, we don't know that," Graham said. "The rook isn't always drawn by sound. Sometimes it just finds you." I massaged my head with my fingers and sat down in an armchair looking into the empty fireplace and wishing that the logs would spontaneously set alight. An orange flame licking at my face, bringing light and warmth into the lounge of the ranger station. It would certainly make everything better. I was entertaining this and other childish fantasies as I kneaded my skin, hoping to work the headache away with brute force of body and mind. But that wasn't working, unsurprisingly, as this was no imagined threat, and no passing scare either, such as a wolf or a bear. As I had said, I had run across wildlife already, and that fear always went away once the threat was out of sight, and it was certainly a distant thought once I was safely inside. But this, it wasn't a wolf or a bear. Wasn't even a person, and those could be frightening enough too. We had dealt with a fair few delinquent adolescents during the short time that I had been working as a ranger. This wasn't anything natural as far as I could tell, or as far as my worrying mind was telling me. And that begged the question. "What is it?" I whispered. "What is the rook?" Graham sighed and wandered off to look out the window, while Abigail came and sat on the sofa perpendicular to me, offering me a soft smile. "Oh, it's gone now, Richard. You don't have to worry. We'll just wait here the rest of the evening and everything it'll be okay." She didn't sound so sure. And besides, she had avoided my question. "What is the rook, Abigail?" I asked, trying to steady my voice so as to convince her that I could be trusted with the truth, that I wouldn't entirely break apart upon learning one more horror on top of the one already bubbling in my brain. The feeling that I had looked upon something which to my mind's eye shouldn't exist. I had known that much just by staring at the shadow. It hadn't been a shadow at all. It had been, well, I didn't know, and I wasn't sure Abigail was going to tell me. But she did, and it started with her own story. I started here as the pandemic was starting to, well, become less of a thing. I mean, it was still a thing, but they were talking about opening up this place to the public again. So they were recruiting. And if you think you've started at a bad time now, Richard, then let me tell you, it ain't a thing on what the park was like back then. Ghostly these woods were. Just Graham and me walking empty paths, getting things ready to open back up to the public. What I didn't understand back then was Harry's reluctance to let the public back. He kept fighting the park service on it, every step of the way. I kept asking Graham about it, and he told me it was because he was scared of the Rook. The two of them saw themselves as gatekeepers, not custodians of the forest as such, but custodians of the people, keeping them safe from the dark thing that walked this land. And the pandemic had helped them in a way. No people around, no threat. And Graham told me that I should be hopeful that we continue holding off, that we don't start letting people back in at any time, because the Rook had been quiet for the past year or so. It would get loud again once we opened the gates, because it always sensed humans. Of course, I didn't believe in the Rook back then. Like you, Richard, I followed the no whistling rule, but I didn't believe a boogeyman would come get me if I were to slip up one night. I knew that folks in the town talked about seeing things. Dogmen, Bigfoot, Wendigos. I had heard all sorts, and I would nod politely, but I had never seen a darn thing myself. Not in my 30-something years on God's green land. I always thought that if there were anything unearthly on Earth, I surely would have seen it by then. I wasn't old, but I'd been around long enough. But now I know there are things so accustomed to the dark, they don't make a habit of being seen. And sometimes it helps me to think of them as predators, because I surely know the Rook ain't the only dark thing out in the forest. But they ain't predators. Predatory behavior is for animals. These dark things, they take for another reason. They don't feed on us. They don't derive any pleasure from it for as far as I can tell. I don't know what it is that drives them. All I know is they take, and everybody they take meets the most horrible end that you can imagine. It was about a month of working by Graham's side when Harry was overruled by the park service and the people started trickling in again, that I learned all these lessons, that I finally saw the Rook for myself. Graham and I were walking the same stretch of path as you and I walked this evening, Richard. Up through the forest, cutting all the way to the mountain from my station. It's a popular trail. And Graham interjected to say as he looked out the window and jumped skittishly from foot to foot. It's the trail where I saw that girl earlier. Abigail lifted a hand. Okay, Graham, we'll sort that out later. We don't know that she's missing. She might have gone home. I don't think so, he replied ominously. I've got the same feeling that I always get, and it ain't got a thing to do with the blood or the marks on the tree. We see plenty of that from animals. No, this is something else. This is the feeling that knots up my stomach every time that thing strikes. Every time that thing takes a person, there's an emptiness in the air, like the Rook has stolen a soul from existence itself, like it's plucked something from reality in a way that it shouldn't have. Abigail sighed and continued. Anyway, Richard, where was I? The trail, I said, hardly wanting her to continue. Right, she said, and I could tell by her wet eyes and the strain in her voice that she hardly wanted to continue either. The trail, well, that night I sensed a difference in Graham. He was behaving sort of like he's behaving tonight, all jittery and jumpy, like he sensed something in the air, and that's something that I would come to notice. It's something that you'll come to notice in time too, Richard. I shook my head. You're off your rocker. I ain't working a day here ever again. I'm getting out of this town and never looking back. That's what I said too. But just let me finish, Richard, okay? Let me finish and then you'll see, and maybe you'll have an easier time of coming to terms with it all than I did. I'm trying to make it easier on you. Trying to make it easier than Graham made it for me. Hey, Graham said, turning to furrow his brow at her. Don't put all this on me, girl. I ain't putting all of it on you, she said. Not the Rook, and you are the way you are. Harry is the way that he is. But you didn't exactly prepare me, either of you. You said not to whistle in the dark. You said the Rook would get me. It sounded like a bedtime story for kids. What was I supposed to think? Well, what were we supposed to tell you? Asked Graham with a scoff. What story could we possibly have told you about the Rook that would have made you believe? You could have at the very least told me about the missing people, she shot back. He went quiet. Yeah, Abigail said, sniffling. Could have told me about them. I told Richard. I nodded. I mean, sure, you told me people had gone missing over the years. It didn't exactly make me believe in whatever the Rook is. I don't think anything would have made me believe in it other than seeing it with my own two eyes, like I did tonight. I couldn't believe that I was speaking in Graham's favor, and by the look in his saucer eyes, he could hardly believe it either. But I thought it only fair to point out that there was no right way to initiate anybody into the role of park ranger, because an impossibility was stalking the forest, and Abigail and I would have always been skeptics about it before seeing it for ourselves. Of course, I didn't know whether Graham's was any better. The tale of the Rook did certainly sound made up, and I would have laughed in his face if he or Harry had told me that was why we shouldn't whistle after dark. But still, Graham looked, for the first time in the months that I had been working alongside him, happy with me. I didn't want to rock the boat by adding anything negative, and so I left it, and I let him turn back to the window. Abigail shrugged. I see your point. I guess there was no way to prepare you for this. But I did try to warn you that you might want to turn your back on this place, go somewhere else, find a job in nature that wouldn't come with this darkness. Well, I've learnt my lesson now, I said. I'll leave in the morning and you'll never see me again. No, you won't, said Abigail. Like I said, there's more to the story. I saw the Rook, right? You heard me talking to Graham about it before. You know that it was 'cause I scraped the lid of the water bottle, made a shrill noise, and I drew it out of hiding. That's just your opinion, interjected Graham. I told you it's only whistling that brings it out. I think it found us by chance. By rotten chance. That can happen sometimes. It happened to us tonight. Richard just saw it out the window. Ain't like any of us whistled, is it? Abigail nodded. You've never understood this, Graham, but I felt something change in me when I made that noise. Like the shrillness of the sound of the scraping lid. It went right through my very core, like it tethered me to something. Graham snorted. Tethered? Yeah, tethered, Abigail insisted. And then the Rook appeared and, well, you saved me, Graham. You saved the pair of us by getting us up to the watchtower. It was terrifying, Richard. We made our way up the metal treads, spiraling around the tower, and when I looked down, I saw it. That silhouette that you saw. I saw it gushing up and around the stairwell, pursuing us and gaining on us. I thought it would have us, but then, about 50 feet up, it just stopped. It never climbs up all the way, Graham said. In all my years, I've always found that the best way to escape it, if you really find yourself stuck, is to get up high. I don't know whether it's scared or what. I think it's what happens once it goes past the top of the tree line, past the canopy of leaves that make up the roof of the forest. I think it's trapped here, and that's a good thing. Means that we can always get away from it if we get out of the forest, you know. It's why we're not safe in this station right now. I think we ought to make a run for the tower. Harry will be up there. He'll probably be expecting us if he's sensed the Rook too. and I'd wager that he has. He might be getting old, but it's like you said, Abigail. Once you've been influenced by this thing, you get a nose for it. I was frowning by this point because Graham was ignoring the tears in Abigail's eyes, and he was ignoring, it seemed, the most important part of what she had said. Tethered, I said. What did you mean by that? She just means that it changes ya, said Graham. That is not what I mean, she said. That's what you and Harry mean because you've never been foolish enough to draw it to you with a whistling sound. I have. By accident, of course, but still. I made the sound and it drew to me. Why do you think that local tribe who taught Harry everything that he knows always warned him not to whistle in particular? They said that he would run into the rook, and there was no avoiding that. But they told me no whistling again and again. They gave him that advice. And Graham sighed. I don't know, Abigail, but I think all this tethering business is in your head. I don't, because I tried to leave. After that shift in the morning, I tried to leave town. I passed out and I crashed my car into a tree. You were still in shock from the events of the night before, Graham said. That was all. You got overwhelmed, passed out, and crashed your car. Abigail shook her head, eyeing me with tears, and I finally understood why. No, it wouldn't let me leave. I saw the rook that day. You and Harry don't believe me, but I did. From the tree line of the forest near the border at the edge of town where I crashed. It watched me from the dark with eyes that looked like mine, Graham. It was like a copy of me was standing there in the dark, hiding from the sunlight and watching. It ain't like any description of the rook that I've ever heard, said Graham. It's just a shadow and it stalks people at night, not during the day. I know what I saw, Abigail said, and I was starting to cry now too, as I pieced together why she was telling me this. And I tried again once I was out of the hospital. I wasn't going to be foolish enough to try driving out again, so I decided to get somebody else to take me out there. I tried to get that taxi driver to take me out of town and he stopped. He stopped driving right before the border and started crying. He told me to get out of the car or it would get him. He wouldn't explain. He didn't need to explain. Because I understand. I felt the pang of pain in my head and I was close to passing out again myself. I've tried other times over the years, plenty of times. I always feel sick, sometimes I black out. And plenty of times if I search the tree line, I'll see it there. The rook, wearing my face atop its black form. And Graham shook his head. For a man who so staunchly believed in a creature beyond worldly explanation, he certainly seemed strongly in denial, set in his firm and unyielding beliefs. No, that's just, you didn't even whistle, Abigail. I know that's what the tribe told Harry all those years ago, but I don't think it's just whistling that puts a person in danger. She whispered as I tried to blink away my tears and she eyed me with pity. I think it's a certain frequency, maybe a certain range of frequencies, a certain stillness that ties a person to this thing, and then it takes a piece of them, even if it doesn't manage to kill them, and make them disappear like all the others. It steals a piece of them and keeps them trapped in this forest, in this town, in this patch of land. It keeps us here unable to escape, probably hoping that it'll one day catch us and make us vanish like all of its other victims. Graham shook his head and looked at me. It's all hogwash, Richard. The rest of it is true. There is a creature beyond explanation. It's a dark thing and it makes people go away. That much is true, but everything else is just nonsense. Then why haven't you or Harry ever tried? Asked Abigail. Why haven't either of you ever tried to drive me out of town? Graham's eyes were tearing up a little themselves. There was that denial again. Oh, because we'd be indulging because. It's okay, Graham. You don't have to pretend, because Richard knows too now, don't you? I nodded. Graham frowned. What is she talking about? I barely managed to get my voice out. I think that I've unwittingly tethered myself to the rook too. I feel everything Abigail is describing. And Graham shook his head. Hey, that's understandable, kid. It's all normal. You've seen a creature that shouldn't exist. Of course you're gonna feel nauseated, scared, and trapped. I shook my head. It's more than that. I started to sob, and Abigail came over to my chair, kneeling before me and putting her hands atop mine, on my knees. I made the same mistake as Abigail when I radioed her to tell her about the blood and the marks on the tree. The radio, it went haywire. Yeah, well, it's an old piece of junk, so what? Asked Graham. So, it made a sound. A high-pitched sound. Heavens above, Graham said, shaking his head and wiping his eyes. I knew that he believed. Deep down, he just didn't want to believe, because that would make him feel culpable, I suppose, for what had happened to Abigail, what happened to me. He and Harry had hired us after all. They had brought us into this world, into this mess. We'll survive, Abigail promised me when I managed to blink out some of my tears and focus on her face again. I've done it for years, and you will too. But what kind of life is it? I asked. You live in constant terror, trapped in a town in a forest, feeling forever followed, haunted by a thing that threatens to make you disappear. How do you live like that? She sniffled. With great difficulty, and one day after another, like wading through water. I don't want us to start thinking like this, Graham said. But you believe it deep down, don't you? I asked. He shook his head. I don't know what I... And Graham was interrupted by rapping on the door. 3 knocks, evenly spaced out, as if there were one for each of us. We all turned slowly to the wooden front door, illuminated by the sickly orange glow of the old light bulb swinging from the ceiling overhead. I don't know how long we waited there with bated breath before Abigail finally said something. Who's there? She called out timidly. There came no reply. I don't know whether that was better or worse. I had expected some inhuman growl, perhaps, or the shrill sound of whistling. I thought that silence was a blessing in that way, but it wasn't. It only left me with more terrifying unknowns to unpack. And I assumed as I sat there in the armchair, Abigail's hands still atop mine as she knelt on the floor before me, that all 3 of us were in agreement. Everybody must remain still, and nobody must do a thing. Graham didn't seem to be on the same page. The older man began walking across the station, floorboards creaking under his thick boots as he went. Don't do it, I begged. Don't do it, Graham. But his mind was made up. He wrapped his fingers around the handle, flicked off the lock, and pulled the door inward. First came a gust of wind. I gasped, thinking it to be the rug, the shadow itself pouring into the ranger station. But it was just that, wind. And I had expected in some form of the creature's trickery, as Graham had put it, for there to be nothing and nobody standing in the dirt outside the station. For the very opening of the door to simply be a means of the rook getting a good look at us, and maybe slipping undetected over our threshold, using its nightmarishly unknown ways to make Abigail and I disappear, leaving Graham alone and screaming into the night. But there was someone there, a young woman, and by the gasp that Graham let out, I knew it was the young hiker that he had seen earlier that day, the one who had gone missing. Graham, I started as the man stepped aside to let the woman in. Don't. She stepped gingerly across the threshold, looking weak and vulnerable. But this was all an illusion. And as she came into the ranger station striding slowly, it felt as if time itself had slowed. It had almost come to a stall entirely. I watched tearfully as she passed Graham in that slow-motion state and let out a pained yelp. The man's skin sagged as she walked past him. It sagged like a wilting flower and then began to come off his bones in flakes. And he was naught but skeletal remains crumpling to the ground in a matter of moments, before the young hiker had even placed a second foot into the station. And when those bones hit the ground, they became ash, before being swept up with the wind and carried out the front door, disappearing with all the others who had been lost to the woods over the years. I leapt to my feet, dragging Abigail up with me, and the two of us ran, screaming as we went, but as fast as we moved. It all felt unthinkably slow. Time still felt blurred. It took what felt like an eternity to reach the back door leading out of the station, but when we did, crossing the threshold back into the forest, the cold air of the forest and sound of wildlife greeted us. Time seemed to steady itself, and all seemed ordinary outside. I had expected the soundless of wild animals cowering in fear from the rook, but maybe they were at peace with it, this thing stealing people away from the world. Abigail slammed the back door behind us, hyperventilating. What? She didn't manage any more than that word repeated. Come on, the watchtower. She didn't respond with words or her eyes. She was far away in spirit, and I realized that was what she needed to do to survive in that moment. All I wanted from her was for her to move her feet, and I was thankful when she did, letting me lead her through the park, between the trees and along trails, and towards Harry's watchtower in the near distance. We ran for a mile, maybe more, before the steel monolith came into view. I didn't look over my shoulder, not because I was afraid of slowing down, but because I was afraid that I would turn to find the rook not behind us at all. I had this horrible feeling, call it that tether that Abigail had talked about, binding us to the rook and perhaps revealing to us as well as to it how far away we were from the thing at any one time. I had this feeling anyway that the creature was not behind us, but perhaps alongside us or in front. I had a feeling that it did not bend to the laws of nature as we did, because it did not abide by the world and its rules. It was of somewhere else, a place to which Graham's ashes had perhaps floated. And I suddenly realized why Abigail kept fighting each and every day, why she had done so for many years. As long and painful as her life might be, the alternative was worse, ending up where the rook took people. Was it some hellscape of eternal torture, something beyond human comprehension? I didn't know, and I didn't want to know. We pushed into the clearing surrounding Harry's watchtower, and that was when I finally dared to turn and look back at the tree line. I let out a yelp of horror. A silhouette, shaped vaguely like a person but one far too tall, was standing between two tall fir trees, and its face, which had been black and formless when I had seen the thing from the comfort and false security of the ranger station, was now a blurry peach color. And as I looked a few moments longer, the details of a face came into view. My face. I was looking at myself. I did not wear a smile or a frown or any expression at all. It was like a wax copy worn by a thing that didn't have a framework to understand such thing as smiles, or frowns, or any human thing. It just wore us like finery. My face was simply another for its collection. I pushed Abigail up the stairs in front of me as the rook moved out from the tree line and began to cross the clearing towards us. "Move, please, Abigail," she grunted, stumbling up the stairs on knocking knees that betrayed her. I knew she wanted to survive, but her body was failing her in light of what we had seen in the ranger station. So I did most of the surviving for us. I pushed her up, put my hands on her back to propel her anytime she slowed, and I reminded her to keep running. She picked up a bit of speed and we started to ascend the tower 2 steps at a time. And as the top of the trees came into view, I thought of Graham's reminder that the rook was trapped by the forest on all sides. I started to smile. This was it, and we were about to be free. And given that I'm here to tell the tale, you know this to be so. So I turned on the steps once we had passed the top of the forest, and I let out a scream as I fell on my back, fell upwards rather than downwards, thankfully. The silhouette was standing there lit by the moon, watching me with my lifeless and unmoving face atop its black, shadowy head. It just stood and watched, unable to move beyond that imaginary upper threshold of its wooded cage. And as it looked at me without speaking or moving, I realized that I was now bound to that cage too, tethered to the rook, much like Abigail. "Richard," she moaned from farther up the stairs. I got to my feet and I followed her. We got to Harry's door and the man gave us solemn looks as he let us in. "What are you doing here so late? I tried to radio Graham that the rook was wandering nearby. Where is Graham?" Things have been different for me since that day. I sensed that things have been different for Harry and Abigail too. I don't think they've ever seen death before. They've known of people going missing, but they've never directly known a person who went missing, and Abigail had certainly never seen it. I don't think either of us will ever forget watching Graham's body turn to nothing before our very eyes. I think of it during my waking hours at all times, and it serves as a stark reminder. A reminder of what the rook will do to Abigail and me, should it ever reel in our tethers. I am not a preacher. I never wanted to be one. I am the kind of man who fixes his own truck, who eats cereal for dinner when he's too tired to cook, who keeps a pair of work boots by the back door and a flashlight in the glove box because both of those things have saved me more than once. I went to school for a long time and I came out on the other side with a job pointing big metal dishes at the sky and listening to the hum the universe makes when it thinks nobody is paying attention. I did that work for almost 20 years and I was good at it. I loved it in the quiet way that a man loves something that he does not have to talk about. I used to think the silence up there was empty. I do not think that anymore. I am recording this from a motel room 2 states away from where it happened. I will not say which motel and I will not say which states, because I do not know yet whether the distance matters. I left my job, I left my house. I left everything that I owned in the closet and the kitchen cabinets, and the little shed out back where I kept my fishing tackle. I took my truck, a duffel bag, the cash that I had in the safe, and the clothes that I was wearing. That was 4 weeks ago. I have been moving since. I am not afraid of being called crazy. I have made peace with that. I am afraid of something worse. I am afraid of being believed for about 10 minutes and then forgotten, the way people forget the warnings on the side of a medicine bottle. I'm afraid that you'll hear this story and nod and go on with your evening, and that later tonight when you step outside for some reason that you won't even remember in the morning, you will glance up at the sky the way that people always do. I'm going to tell you not to, and I'm going to tell you why. I would like you to listen all the way to the end before you decide whether I'm worth listening to. By the time that I'm finished, something will have noticed you too. Not because of any ritual, not because I'm saying any special words, just because attention is a door that swings both ways. and I'm about to open mine very wide, and you are standing on the other side of it. I am sorry about that in advance. I am telling you anyway because I think you deserve to know. The place that I worked is a radio telescope facility in the high desert of eastern Oregon, a long way from anywhere. If you have driven through that part of the country, you know the kind of land that I mean. Sage and rabbit brush and dry red dirt. Long flat stretches where the road runs straight for so many miles that you start to think the steering wheel is just a decoration. Mountains in the distance that never seem to get any closer no matter how long you drive. The nearest town is a little ranching community called Harney Bluff. It has a gas station, a feed store, a diner that closes at 7, and a church that nobody goes to anymore. The nearest stoplight is 40 minutes away. The nearest hospital is over an hour. At night, when you step outside, the stars come down so thick and so close that they feel like a weight on your shoulders. I used to love that feeling. I used to stand out by the dishes on clear nights and just look up and feel small in a way that made me feel peaceful. Like I was a kid again at the bottom of a swimming pool, looking up at the sun through the water. The facility itself is 6 dishes laid out in a shallow valley, with a low cinder block control building in the middle, and a gravel access road that turns to soup whenever the rare desert rain comes through. The dishes are not the giant kind that you see in movies. They're medium-sized, maybe 40 feet across each, and they move on heavy steel mounts that groan when they turn. The control building has a kitchen, a bunk room with 4 cots, 2 bathrooms, a workshop, and the main observation room with the consoles and the screens and the chair that I sat in for most of my working life. There is a backup generator in a shed out back. There is a propane tank for the heat. And there is a satellite phone for emergencies because cell service doesn't reach us out there. And that is the whole place. That is where I spent most of my last 20 years. There were 4 of us on the regular crew when this began. Hollis was the site manager. He was in his late 60s, lean and weathered, the kind of man who had been doing the same job for so long that the job and the man had started to look alike. He had been at the facility since it was built in the late 70s. He treated the dishes the way a rancher treats his cattle, with a kind of rough affection, talking to them under his breath when he thought nobody was listening. He had a wife in Harney Bluff and 2 grown daughters who lived out of state. He drank a little but never on shift. He was the closest thing that I had to a friend out there. And then there was Priya. She was the new postdoc, maybe 27, maybe 28. She had come to us from a university back east, and the desert was a shock to her. She had grown up in cities her whole life, and the size of the sky out there made her quiet for the first few weeks, the way it makes a lot of newcomers quiet. She was sharp though, the kind of sharp where you could ask her a question about a dataset that she had glanced at once a week ago, and she could tell you the answer without looking. She missed her mother. She called home most evenings before her shift started. There was Doug, the maintenance tech. Doug was the youngest of us, maybe 30, a good old boy from somewhere in the Texas Panhandle, who had ended up in Oregon by way of 3 or 4 jobs that did not work out. He played country music too loud in the workshop. He kept a coffee can full of cigarette butts by the back door, even though he wasn't supposed to smoke on the property. He was the kind of guy who would fix your flat tire for free and then refuse to take a beer for it. I liked him a great deal. And then there was me, Wes Caldwell, the senior observer, the one who decided what the dishes listened to on any given night. 20 years in, divorced once and no children, a small house in Harney Bluff with a yard that I never got around to landscaping. I worked the night rotation more often than I had to, because I liked the quiet, and because there was nobody waiting up for me at home. I'm telling you all this because I want you to understand that we were normal people. We were not seekers. We were not looking for anything in particular. We were just doing our jobs. We had bills and routines and small private griefs, and we drank too much coffee. The thing that found us did not find us because we were special. It found us because we were standing still in the right place, and because I in particular was bored, and because I didn't know when to leave well enough alone. And the first wrong night was a Tuesday in October. I remember the day of the week because I had stopped at the diner in Harney Bluff for a tuna melt on my way out to the facility. And Tuesday was the only day that they made the tuna melt the way that I liked it. The sky was clear, the wind was light. The temperature was already dropping into the kind of cold that you feel in your teeth. The dry desert cold that comes before the snow. The schedule for that night was nothing special. We were supposed to spend a long stretch of hours pointing at a quiet patch of sky over the constellation Eridanus, in a region that astronomers called a cold spot. A cold spot is exactly what it sounds like. It's a place in the sky where there is, as far as anybody has ever been able to tell, nothing. No stars worth talking about. No galaxies worth talking about. Just the faint background hum that fills the whole universe everywhere you point. We use cold spots as a baseline. You listen to the nothing for a while so you know what nothing sounds like, and then later when you are listening to a real source, you can subtract the nothing out and see what's left. I had pointed the dishes at cold spots 1,000 times in my career. It was the most boring kind of observing that there is. You set the dishes, you start the run, you sit in the chair and you drink your coffee and read a book. And you check the screens every so often to make sure that nothing has gone wrong with the equipment. And then you wait for your shift to end. That was all that it had ever been. That night though, the silence had a texture to it. I don't know how else to describe it. The instruments showed nothing that I could point at. The needles on the meters stayed where they were supposed to stay. The screen stayed clean. There was no signal, there was no anomaly. There was nothing on any of the readouts that I could have shown to another scientist and said, "Look at this." But I sat in my chair and the hair on my arm stood up, and the back of my neck went cold in a way that it goes cold when somebody is standing behind you in a dark room and you haven't heard them come in. I turned around. There was nobody behind me. The control room was empty except for Priya, who was at the other console across the room working on something on her laptop. I looked at her and she was already looking at me. She said very quietly, "Do you feel that?" I said yes. Neither of us said anything else for a long time after that. We sat there in the hum of the cooling fans and the soft tick of the clock on the wall, and we listened, and we did not know what we were listening for. After a while, the feeling faded, the way the feeling of being watched in a dark room fades when you finally turn the light on. We finished the shift, and we did not talk about it. We went home. I told myself in the drive back to town in the gray light before sunrise that it was nerves, that it was low blood sugar, that the tuna melt had been off, that I was tired, that I was getting old and my imagination was starting to do things to me. I told myself that I would laugh it off later. It wasn't so funny though. Over the next 2 weeks, the feeling came back. Not every night. That was the thing that kept me from saying anything to anyone official. If it had been every night, I could have called it a malfunction, or a problem with the wiring, or some kind of low-frequency interference from a piece of equipment somewhere in the building. But it was not every night, only sometimes. And after a while, I started to notice that it was only sometimes when we were pointed at a cold spot, when we were tracking a known source, a star or a galaxy or a pulsar or anything the sky was supposed to actually contain. The feeling never came. The feeling only came when we were aimed at the parts of the sky that were supposed to be empty. I tried to talk to Doug about it first because he was the easiest to talk to. I caught him out by the workshop one afternoon smoking one of the cigarettes that he wasn't supposed to be smoking, and I said, "Hey, have you ever felt anything weird out here at night?" He squinted at me for a second and then he laughed and said that the desert will play tricks on you, especially when you have been out in it as long as we have. He said that he had felt all kinds of weird things over the years, and none of them had ever turned out to be anything. He said the trick was to drink less coffee and sleep a little bit more. He clapped me on the shoulder and went back inside. I tried Priya next. I caught her in the kitchen at the start of her shift while she was making tea. I said, "Do you remember that night a couple of weeks ago?" She knew which night I meant without me having to say anything else. She put her tea bag down and she looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, in a very quiet voice, that she had stopped going to the bathroom alone during the night shifts. She said it like she was admitting something embarrassing. She would not tell me why. She picked up her mug and walked out of the kitchen and did not look back. That's when I knew that it wasn't just me. That was when I knew that I had to go to Hollis. Hollis was in the workshop the next morning, his hands black with grease, working on the gear assembly for one of the smaller dishes. The workshop smelled like oil and old coffee, and the dry electric smell that the heaters in the building put out when they had been running too long. I stood in the doorway and I told him as plainly as I could what I had been feeling. That watched feeling. The texture and the silence. And the way that it only came when we were pointed at the empty places. He went very still while I was talking. He set down the wrench that he had been holding. He picked up a rag and he wiped his hands on it for a long time without looking at me. Now, I have known a lot of men in my life who use the act of wiping their hands as a way of buying themselves time before they have to say something hard. Hollis was buying himself a lot of time. When he finally looked up, his face had something in it that I had never seen before. He looked older than he was. He looked like a man who had been hoping a particular conversation would never come up, and who had just been told that it was here. He said in a voice that was not the voice he usually used, that we should not point the dishes at the empty places anymore. Of course, I asked him why. He said the old crew, the ones who had built the place, used to have a rule about it. He said that they never wrote the rule down because nobody wanted to be the one to put it on paper. He said the rule was to not aim at cold spots. You do not listen to the silence. You do not look up at the sky for too long when you're alone. He said that it had been passed down from crew to crew like a family secret, in quiet little conversations like the one that we're having, and that he had been planning to tell me eventually, and that he was sorry he hadn't told me sooner. I asked him what would happen if we didn't stop. He said the sky was not as empty as the textbook said. He said that some things up there were listening for anyone who listened back. And then he said that he wasn't going to talk about it anymore, and he picked up his wrench and he went back to work. And his hands were shaking just a little, and he did not look at me again. He went home early that day. He did not come in for the next 3 shifts. When I called his house, his wife said that he was sick. The way she said it made me think that she knew that he was not sick, that she had heard her husband say things like this before, and had spent a long time learning not to ask questions about them. I'm a scientist. A man told me not to look, and so of course I looked. I want to be honest with you about this. I want you to know that I had every chance to leave it alone. Hollis had told me to leave it alone, and I trusted him. And I knew in my gut that he was telling the truth about something even if I did not understand what that truth was. Priya had told me without telling me that something was off. Doug had brushed me off in a way that I now think was its own kind of warning. The warning of a man who had decided that he didn't want to know any more than he already knew. Every door in front of me was closed, and somebody that I respected was standing in front of every door, and they were all telling me in their own ways to turn around and walk back the way that I came. I did not walk back. I sat down at the console on a Sunday night when I had the facility mostly to myself, with only Doug asleep in the bunk room down the hallway. So I aimed the largest dish at the deepest and emptiest patch of sky that I could find in the charts. I picked a spot so empty that even the cold spot studies had skipped over it. I told myself that I was just gonna listen for a little while. I told myself that if I felt the watched feeling, I would shut it down right away and never do it again. I told myself a lot of things that night, sitting in the chair with my hands on the controls, while the dish outside groaned and turned and lifted its great metal face toward a piece of sky that nothing was supposed to be in. For a long time, there was nothing. I almost laughed at myself. I almost got up to make a fresh pot of coffee. I had my hand on the arm of the chair, ready to push myself up, and I was already half smiling at how silly the whole thing had been. And that was the moment that it started. And the feeling came in the way that a tide comes in. Not a wave, not a sudden thing. Just a slow, steady rising that you don't notice until your feet are already wet. I felt the hair on my arm stand up at first, the way that it had on the Tuesday in October. And then the back of my neck went cold. Then my mouth went dry all at once, as if somebody had reached into me and turned a faucet off. And then my ears felt full, the way they feel when you're swimming and the water has gotten in and will not come back out. And the hum of the cooling fans in the room got softer and softer until I could not hear them at all. The fluorescent lights in the control room seemed to dim. I checked the meter on the wall. The meter said the lights were exactly as bright as they were supposed to be. I looked back up at them and they still looked dim to me. I don't know how to explain that. The room was darker and the room was not darker, and both of those things were true at the same time. I felt a pressure in my chest, not pain. It was the feeling that you get when somebody you love is about to deliver bad news. The feeling that something in the next 30 seconds is going to change the shape of your life, and you can't do anything about it. I sat very still in the chair. I did not move. I did not breathe deeply. I just sat there with my hands resting on the arms of the chair, and I waited. And then, in the middle of my own head and my own voice, a thought arrived that I had not put there. I don't know how to make you understand what that's like. You have your own thoughts in your own head all day long, and you know which ones are yours. The same way you know which hand is your hand when it's in your pocket. You don't have to check. You don't have to verify it, you just know. The thought that arrived in my head that night was not mine, and I knew that it was not mine the way that I would have known if a stranger had reached into my pocket and put their fingers around my hand. The thought was very calm. The thought was very simple. The thought was the certainty that I had been seen. Not noticed, not detected. Seen. The way a parent sees a child who has wandered into the road. The way you see a moth that has landed on the back of your hand. With complete attention. With complete understanding of what I was. With the long, patient interest of something that had all the time in the world and had decided just now in this exact moment to spend a little of that time on me. I tore the headphones off. I did not even remember putting them on, but they were on my head and I tore them off, and I slapped at the controls and shut the dish down, and the great metal arm outside groaned and began to swing back to its resting position. I sat in the dark control room shaking. I don't know how long I sat there. The sun came up at some point. I noticed the gray light on the floor and I realized that I hadn't moved in hours. My legs had gone numb. My hands were still on the arms of the chair locked in place, and when I tried to pull them away, my fingers had cramped, and I had to pry them loose one at a time. I went to the bathroom and I threw up. I rinsed my mouth out. I looked at myself in the mirror over the sink, and the man in the mirror looked like he had aged 10 years in one night, and he looked like he knew something that he wished he did not know. I went back to the bunk room and I laid down on the cot and did not sleep. Priya came in the next morning. She walked into the kitchen and she saw me sitting at the table with my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. And she stopped in the doorway and said, "What did you do?" I told her, and I told her all of it. The dish, the empty patch of sky, the slow rising, the lights that were dim and not dim, the thought in my head that wasn't my own, the scene. She listened without any interruption. She did not move from the doorway the whole time that I was talking. When I finished, she came in and sat down across from me at the little table, and she looked at her hands for a long moment, and then she told me her side of it, the part that she had been holding back. She had said on one of the bad nights, when we had both been feeling the watched feeling and neither of us had been willing to say so out loud, she had walked outside to clear her head. She had gone out the back door of the control building and she had walked a little ways across the gravel toward the smallest of the dishes. And she had stood there in the cold and looked up at the stars. She said the stars had looked back. She did not mean that the way that it sounds. She did not mean it as a metaphor. She said she felt every single star in her sky turn its attention toward her all at once, the way a crowd in a stadium turns when somebody shouts. She said she could feel the weight of all of them on her at the same time, and she said that it was not a hostile weight, but it wasn't a friendly one either. It was the weight of something enormous and very old that had finally noticed she was there, and it was now considering her, the way you might consider an ant that had walked across the back of your hand. She said that she had run back inside. She sat under the fluorescent lights in the kitchen for almost an hour with her face in her hands, trying to convince herself that that had not happened. She said that she had almost succeeded. She said that she had been doing a pretty good job of it until I sat down in front of her this morning with my face the way that it was. She told me she did not think that we had discovered anything new. She thought that we had just finally stood still long enough to notice what had always been there. She said something that I haven't been able to stop thinking about since. She said the universe is not a place. The universe is a face, and that we have spent our whole lives staring at it without knowing it had eyes. We sat at that little table for a long time without saying anything else. Outside, the wind was picking up, and I could hear it moving across the dishes, making the steel mounts creak. And 2 nights later, Doug did not show up for his shift. His truck was in the parking lot, and his tools were laid out in the workshop the way that he always laid them out at the end of a job, in a neat line on the bench, the wrenches in order from smallest to largest. His coffee cup was sitting on the workbench next to the tools, and when I touched the side of it with the back of my hand, it was still warm. Priya and I searched the building. We checked the bunk room, the bathrooms, the kitchen, the workshop, and the little storage closet where we kept the spare parts. We were starting to get worried. I was starting to think that we were going to have to use the satellite phone and call someone. We found him in the control room. He was sitting in my chair, the chair that I sat in every shift, the chair that I had been sitting in 2 nights before when I had pointed the dish at the empty patch of sky. He was sitting in it the way you sit in a chair when you've been in it for a while and have gotten comfortable, with his shoulders relaxed and his hands resting on his knees. He was facing the main screen. The main screen was turned off. The entire console was off. There was nothing for him to look at, but he was looking at it anyway, with a small, peaceful smile on his face, the kind of smile a person wears when they're listening to a piece of music only they can hear. I said his name. He did not turn his head. I walked around in front of him into his line of sight and I waved my hand in front of his face. His eyes did not move. He kept smiling at the dark screen as if it were not there. I touched his shoulder. He spoke without looking at me. His voice was mostly his own, that same drawl that he always had. But there was something underneath it. It was like a second voice was humming along with his voice, softly just below the surface, the way that a bass note hums under a melody. I don't know how to describe it any better than that. You have to hear something like that to understand. I hope you never do. He said that it was all right, Wes. He said that there's nothing to be afraid of. He said it's not angry, it's not cruel. It's just very, very old and very, very interested. And once it knows your name, it likes to keep you company. I asked him if he was all right. He said, "I've never been better." And then he turned his head slowly, the way a man wakes up from a nap, and he looked at me for the first time. His eyes were these same eyes that I had known for years, but there was something behind them now that hadn't been there before. Something patient and interested. Something looking at me through Doug's eyes the way you might look at a fish through the glass of an aquarium. He smiled at me with that small, peaceful smile, and he said, "Would you like to be kept company too, Wes?" I don't remember backing out of the room. I remember being in the control room, and I remember being in the hallway, and the part in between is gone. I grabbed Priya by the arm, and her face was white because she had heard him too, and we didn't say anything to each other. We didn't need to. We walked out of the building and we got into my truck and I drove us off the property. I didn't look back at the control room window because I did not want to know if Doug was watching us leave. I drove to Hollis's house at the edge of town. It was the middle of the morning by then and the streets of the town were mostly empty the way that they always were that time of day. I parked in his driveway behind his old pickup. Priya stayed in the truck. I went up to the door and I knocked, and Hollis answered it almost immediately, like he had been standing in the front room watching the driveway. He took one look at my face and he said, "Come in." He poured 2 glasses of bourbon at his kitchen table. It wasn't even noon. He poured one for me and one for himself, and he sat down across from me. He did not touch his glass, and he didn't ask me what had happened. He just waited. I told him about Doug and everything that I had seen. Him staring at that blank screen and his smile and that second voice that came from his. I told him that I needed him to tell me what it was. I told him that I wasn't leaving his house until he told me. He took a long swallow of his bourbon. He set the glass down very carefully on the table. He looked at the wall behind me for a long moment. The way men do when they're looking at something that's not actually there. And then he started to talk. He said when the array was first built, back in the late 70s, the original team had felt the same things that I had been feeling. He said that they had not had a name for it then either. He said they had been just a small crew, about 5 or 6 men, and they had been very excited about their new equipment and their new piece of the sky. And they had pointed the dishes at all kinds of places, including the ones that were supposed to be empty, because they hadn't known any better. He said that feeling of being watched had started for them within the first month. He said one of the crew, a young man whose name Hollis still could not bring himself to say out loud, had kept pointing the dishes at these empty spots anyway. He had been the curious type. He had thought that he was on the edge of some grand discovery. He had not been wrong exactly, but he hadn't understood what kind of edge it was. He had spent more and more of his shifts aimed at the cold spots, and he had spent more and more of his off hours sitting outside the control building at night and looking up at the sky. The rest of the crew started to notice that he wasn't really there anymore when you talked to him, and that there was something else lurking behind his eyes that hadn't been there when he had first arrived. Hollis said that one night, the young man had just walked out into the desert. He hadn't taken his truck. He hadn't even taken a flashlight. He just got up and walked away from the facility on foot, in the middle of the night, in the direction of nothing in particular. They had found his body about a week later, sitting upright against a juniper tree about 3 miles out, with his hands folded in his lap and his face turned up toward the sky. He had been dead for several days, and the whole time, he had been smiling. Hollis said that the rule had been created after that. Don't aim it at the cold spots and don't listen to the silence. And whatever you do, don't look up at the sky for too long when you're alone. The rule had been spread from crew to crew over the years, the way that I had wanted Hollis to pass it down to me. He said that he had been planning to tell me about it on my 1-year anniversary at the facility, the way the man before him had told him. But my 1-year anniversary had come and gone, and I had seemed like such a steady and sensible man that he had thought maybe that I didn't need to be told. He had thought that he could let the rule die with himself. He said that he had been wrong, and he apologized. I asked him what it was. He looked at his glass of bourbon for a long moment, and then he said that he did not know. He said nobody really knew. He said the word God was the closest word that people had for it, but it was not really the right word. Because the God in the books was supposed to love you, and this thing definitely did not love you. But it didn't hate you either. It just noticed you, and being noticed by something that big, he said, was its own kind of ending. Not the ending where you stopped existing, the ending where you stopped being only yourself. The ending where part of you started belonging to something else, and that part got bigger over time, until there was not much of the original you left. He said that he thought Doug was already gone. He said that he thought I should leave the state. He said that he thought I should never risk looking up at the night sky again, and that if I had to be outside after dark, I should keep my eyes firmly focused on the ground or on the horizon, and never to let them drift up. I asked him if he had ever pointed the satellite dishes at the empty places himself. He just looked at me for a long moment, and then he said one time, a long time ago. He said that he had felt enough that night to know that he never wanted to feel it again, and he said that he had been very careful for 40 years. He said that he thought he had been forgotten by it for the most part, but sometimes on certain nights he could still feel a faint pressure, like a hand resting on the top of his head, and he knew that being forgotten was not the same as being unseen, and that the thing knew exactly where he was and was simply choosing for now not to spend any more of its attention on him. He said he hoped that I would be that lucky. He did not sound like he believed I would be. I finished my bourbon and I shook his hand. He held onto my hand a little longer than he needed to, the way old men do when they think they are saying goodbye for the last time. I went back to my truck. Priya was still sitting there in the passenger seat, exactly where I had left her, with her hands folded in her lap. I went back to the facility one more time after that in the middle of the day, in full sunlight. I told myself that the daylight would make this all easier. I don't know if it did. Priya was waiting in the parking lot when I pulled in. She had a duffel bag at her feet. She had gone in a little earlier to get her things. She didn't tell me whether she had seen Doug, and I did not ask. I think if she had seen him, she did not want to remember it, and I did not want to make her remember it for my sake. I went back into the control building. I did not go into the control room. I went to the bunk room and I grabbed the small bag of clothes that I kept there for long shifts. I went into the kitchen and I took the photo of my parents that I kept on the windowsill. And I went back out, and I locked the front door behind me out of habit. And I've thought about that lock a lot since then. I don't know why I decided to lock the door. I don't know who I was locking out or in. We got in my truck and I started the engine. I put it into gear. I pulled out of the parking lot and onto the gravel access road that leads down out of the valley and toward the highway. I glanced in the mirror behind me. The satellite dishes were all turned the exact same way, all 6 of them, and they were all pointing at my truck. Of course, I hadn't turned them. I mean, nobody could have turned them. They had been in their rest positions when I had walked into the building, and they had been in their rest positions when I had walked back out, because I had walked past them both times, and I would have noticed if they had been moved. But now, as I look in my rearview mirror, as I drive away down that gravel road, all 6 of those great metal dishes were facing my truck, the way that a row of sunflowers faces the sun, and they were tracking us. I could see the smallest one moving very slowly on its mount as we drove, keeping its great metal face pointed straight at the back of the truck. Priya saw them too. She was looking in the side mirror. Again, she did not say anything. She just reached over and put her hand on top of mine on the gear shift, and I kept driving, and I did not look in the mirror again. We drove for 2 days. We slept in the truck that first night, in a turnout off the highway somewhere in Idaho. We ate gas station food and we didn't talk that much. There wasn't much to say. We parted ways at a bus station in Boise. She had family in another part of the country and she said that she was going to go to them. I gave her all the cash that I had on me. She tried to refuse it, but I made her take it. I hugged her and she hugged me back. She was crying a little. So was I. I have not seen her since. I really hope that she's all right. I'm afraid she isn't though, in that same quiet way that I'm not. I think about her every day. I'm back in the motel room now. The heater under the window is making the same tired rattle that it has been making since I checked in, and the curtains are drawn and the lamp on the nightstand is the only light that I have on. I've been sitting on the edge of the bed for a long time with the recorder in my hand. I told myself that when I started this that I was going to warn you. I told myself that I owed you that much. I've been telling myself a lot of things these last few weeks, and I'm beginning to wonder how many of them were ever true. Something is happening to me as I sit here. I want to describe it to you honestly, but I think honesty is the only thing that I have left that is worth anything. There is that pull. That is the simplest word for it. A pull, the way a river pulls at your legs when you're standing in it up to your knees. And it's not coming from inside the room. It's coming from outside, past the curtains, past the parking lot, from up above the roof of this little motel in this little town. It's beginning stronger the longer that I sit here. I thought talking about this would make it weaker. I thought putting the words in order would help me hold the line. It has not helped. If anything, the line has gotten thinner. I haven't smoked a cigarette in 11 years. I quit the year that my father passed because he died of the thing that smokers die of. And I made myself a promise standing next to his bed that I was done. I've kept that promise every single day since. I haven't ever been tempted, most days. I'm telling you this so that you understand what it means when I tell you that there is an unopened pack of cigarettes on the nightstand next to me right now. I bought them at a gas station close by about an hour ago. I do not remember deciding to buy them. I remember standing under the fluorescent lights of the gas station and pointing at the rack behind the counter. And I remember the man behind the counter sliding the pack across to me without saying anything. I'm gonna step outside in a minute. I'm gonna smoke one of these. I've been telling myself for the last hour that I'm going outside only for the cigarette. But that's a lie. I know that it's a lie. I'm telling it to myself anyway. I want to say something else before I go. We are so small. I have known that my whole working life, in the way scientists know it, and the way a man knows it when he's spent 20 years pointing instruments at things so far away that the light from them is older than the human race. But knowing a thing in your head is not the same as knowing it in your chest. I know it in my chest now. We are very, very small, and the dark between the stars is very, very large. And that darkness is not empty. There are things out there that are bigger than anything you have a word for. Bigger than planets, bigger than the spaces between planets. Old in a way that makes the word old sound like a joke that a child tells. People have always known about them, in the back parts of themselves. People have always called them gods, because there was no other word that felt right in the mouth. People built churches and lit candles and got down on their knees, and the thing that they were reaching for was real. It was always real. It was just not what the book said it was. The book said that it loved you. The book said that it would save you. The books were trying to make a thing the size of the night sky into a thing that would fit inside of a human heart. And it does not fit. It was never going to fit. But that does not mean it's bad. That is what I want to tell you. I've been thinking about this for the past hours, sitting here on this bed, and I think that I had it wrong before. I think that I was scared, and I think being scared made me say a lot of things into this recorder that were not fair. The thing that I felt out at the facility was not cruel. Doug told me that in the control room, with that small, peaceful smile on his face, and I didn't listen to him because I was afraid of his smile. I'm not afraid anymore. I think I understand why he's smiling. I'm gonna put this down for a minute and I'm gonna step outside. I'm back. I don't know how long I was out there. The cigarette burned all the way down to the filter and I did not take more than 2 drags of it. I dropped it in the gravel by the door of my room. The wind put it out for me. I want to tell you what happened. I walked out into the parking lot. The air was cold, the kind of cold that makes the inside of your nose sting. There was nobody else around. The motel sign was buzzing. I lit the cigarette with the little plastic lighter that the man at the gas station had given me, and I took 1 drag and the taste was awful, and I almost laughed because of how awful it was. I had built it up in my head, the whole walk out as the thing that I needed, but it was not the thing I needed. I knew right away what I actually wanted. The cigarette was just an excuse to be standing in the parking lot with my face uncovered. I kept my eyes on the gravel for a while. I was still trying. I want you to know that I really was trying. I had told myself that I would not look up, and I'm not in the habit of breaking promises to myself, even now. But the pull of it was so strong. The night sky was so quiet, but I could feel it up there waiting. After a minute, I thought to myself, just a second, just 1 second. I have already been seen. What's 1 more second going to do? And I looked up. There was no fear, no cold pressure in my chest, no second voice in my head. There was just warmth. A warmth that started at the top of my skull and ran down through my whole body. The way warmth runs through you when you come in from a long walk in the snow and somebody you love hands you a cup of something hot. It was the warmth of being recognized, of being known, of standing in front of something so much larger than yourself that there's no question of pretending anymore, no question of holding anything back, no question of being alone ever again. I stood in the parking lot with my face turned up and the cigarette burning forgotten in my hand. And I understood, for the first time in my life, this is what everybody was searching for. This is what people were searching for when they knelt in a church. They were reaching for this, that warmth that I felt in the parking lot. But they had been looking in the wrong place. They should have been looking up. The whole time, all they had to do was look up. I'm almost finished now. I want to take back what I said before. I was wrong. I was so wrong, and I'm sorry that I scared you. I'm sorry that I told you not to look. The sky's good. The thing in the sky is good. It's been waiting for us for a very long time, and it is patient. But patience is not the same as not wanting. And I think it wants very much to be seen. I think it's been lonely in a way a thing that big can be lonely. And I think every pair of eyes that lift toward it is a small kindness. And I think we owe it those kindnesses after all this time. So here's what I want you to do. When you stop listening to this, I want you to stand up. I want you to walk to your door and I want you to step outside into whatever night is waiting for you out there. I want you to tip your head back and look up. Do not glance, do not check and then look away. Look. Stand still under it the way that I'm standing still under it right now. Because I am still out here. I never really came back inside. The recorder is in my hand and the door of my room is open behind me. And the light from the lamp is spilling out across the gravel, and that warmth is still running through me, and it is so much better than I knew anything could be. Look up tonight. Please look up and just keep looking, and let it see you the way that it has wanted to see you all along. It has been waiting. It is so glad that you're here. Look up.